And then you go back to the ones that do. Absolutely, I'm with you on that. Art would be so much better.
Dave, I have a quick question. On a serious note, that email you sent out on recycling from whatever that guy's name is?
Showed up in the planning board, so you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. But it's just like 8.7 is,
Yeah, pretty miserable, huh?
I thought it was actual.
That's what I said too.
I thought it was higher than that.
And that's why I put it,
We're about on par with Auburn, and Auburn only collects every other Friday, Saturday.
and the only reason there was a spike in there from Rob's perspective, initially it was like it went 8 to like, 11 or something. Back down. There's a novelty of the single sort wore off. It says like when people first did it, they were all into it, they knew what the rules were and stuff, they were making conscious effort to separate and stuff. He says, and then people just fall back to bad habits again. Start throwing trash and or, stuff that you could recycle into the trash.
That will change.
Will we take it back? That was his point. He says every community that's done that, if we do that, you're going to want it. You end up recycling by default.
It's so easy. Recycling.
Oh, it is. And even if I have a friend who lives in mobile home, so it's not easy for her to do space, but she still does it. And if she can do it, anybody can do it, because it's very simple. You know, good area around.
I chance to stop, what she should do.
Potentially.
Go to Home Depot, buy the 55 or whatever.
Hoping, we're gonna talk about that tonight.
It's bad. Because of the
Well,
area.
actually, there might be,
But if she, but what
I
if
think
she
two
doesn't want it?
actually, for,
If she has,
for
what I
recommendation.
have is just cover clamps right on, you just keep on adding it, you don't have to
Yeah.
sort it. If she has to
Yeah.
sort, then I can understand. She doesn't usually, they don't pick up trash at her place one time, so she actually takes it. I mean, that's how, not too many people would go above and beyond this, because that's one of the little.
My actual trash, I could easily go 2 weeks without putting it out.
Yeah.
The reason I put it out is because it smells, you know.
Yeah,
Leave it too long.
I can take all the trash in our house and get it in your house. I'll take, I start at the back of the house and I empty all the trash into one.
Actual leftover food.
If you're composting,
Not
Composting.
those in containers or
Although I got a pig, it's still compost.
all you're left over with is plastic bag. You know, I mean, your cans, your
I really buy all
boxes,
Portland,
everything
Portland,
goes.
Portland area, that compost.
I would too, because it's,
It's to garbage.
I think that's fabulous. I would love it. I just know how some people are gonna be, it's 10%. I know, but most people are $4. They just wait. Have you met the people?
Well, in public hearings, but I don't know that they're gonna wanna acknowledge their public. Right,
I'm all for it.
right, but are they actually gonna be looking? I don't think.
You guys go to the art walk?
Oh, yeah. I went
It was a pretty
missed
good
it.
one.
Actually, I saw you, I was gonna stop.
Yes.
You were chatting, you were in front of the, you know, where they do the art of the old Lenny W.T. Grant building.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
okay.
it was-
Scheduled as them formally.
It wasn't as good as last month. Last month
That
was
was my
much
wife,
busier.
my sister, and my 2 tenants.
Yeah.
The 2 guys and 2 tenants.
I didn't see you there. Dave,
I was early. I went early.
Yeah, I was there all night, and then we always finish off at Gallery of Lyceum while it's still open. Kevin and Robert came after. And we
Those are your husband's photos in there?
Yeah, there's some of them, yeah. He sold 3 things.
I didn't know we could go in there.
Oh, yeah, no, she's open for the art one. It won't be open next month because fuel. Probably
Well,
gonna
I
be
want to do
closed.
it once for.
Now, do they use that for banquets or something like that?
All the time.
Oh, okay, so that's why that space is initially there.
That space is there because he owned it, he wanted it to be a gallery,
Yeah.
so. But then,
It's going back to being,
just for the summer, it's going back to be a gallery. Although, like I said, I think he's gonna be closed in July, they're ripping up the carpets.
because he's gonna make it more.
It's gonna be called smaller bar. It's gonna be
It'd
called
probably be
Sidecar.
like a
But
dozen.
it's gonna be more fun.
Because it's 100.
It's gonna be a small place. Well, you can rent it now. You've
Yeah.
always been able to rent it. But he's now gonna put tables in there. He's gonna build a bar.
In there?
Yeah, because the bar scene is what's really missing.
Yeah.
So that's why.
So that's why I'm thinking, I mean, if we do it in one more meeting, but I was thinking two.
I keep telling him. He goes, it's gonna be called Sidecar. Karen and I go, you can call it whatever you want. We're calling it a gallery.
Yeah, we're still talking. He sent the plans and
Supposedly by September.
kind of, yeah, we kind of like
So,
settled
two more
on
meetings.
supposedly, you know, Eric settled on things.
So,
Eric,
goal is to get the final
he doesn't settle on that.
Anyways, my last email to him was like, what do you want? Like, what do you want me to, like, you tell me how you want, how do you want it? Because I know he's perfectly capable of doing it himself.
clear that.
Does he want me to, like, I'm not gonna just waste my time. Start
Yeah, you wanna
writing
be
things.
careful with him.
Exactly.
He
And Ed's
Tell him, like, tell me what you want, and then I'll put
changes
it,
his mind like.
I'll put some time in, but I'm not
big enough to
planning,
get
I
in
just,
do it.
I'll do these quick sketches and change a little here, change a
One
little
of the
there.
workshop with other
Yeah,
items.
It's not what you can do with such a small
it
space.
is, yeah.
So then I'll let you know
Use the
towards,
bar,
you know,
something to go
mid-end
against the
July
right.
where we are with the
I
board.
mean, worst case scenario, if they don't.
But I know it's
Rachel's
almost
back into it.
I'm hoping the council's gonna be.
The
Because
last place
he
you
wants to,
described it.
because he wants to put in some ovens. When did she tell you about
Oh,
that?
I think, because they understand it's not etched in stone.
on that one.
At the end of the day, planning board is gonna review all the, whatever we're gonna do.
He wants to put in some
Make it
ovens.
that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of hoping every schedule like a workshop.
But he's always concerned about his rentals, so that's kind of, you know, he's,
Yeah.
that floor has to be wide open for long tables.
Yep.
No, I don't think it'll be a slam dunk for any.
Yep.
Is he
Well,
still
we've
gonna
also
do that
been thinking
booth, that
about-
little booth area?
He wanted,
Like a little,
he wanted to do it like a banquet,
yeah, banquet.
and like I laid one out, and it just doesn't really work, because you're trying to get you're trying to get as much seating as possible.
So,
You know why he was doing
Especially where they know
Elizabeth Street Mall?
proof is important.
we could have a workshop either simply on the fourth or the eighth.
So it doesn't matter if it's that,
So,
put
you
whatever
know.
you want.
That's why I'm not sure what it
Would be nice not to, the issue, he better not do that. He better not do what they did at Marshall.
I'll call this meeting of the Planning Board for the City of Lewiston to order for June the 29th, I believe it is, right? 29th, 2015. Pauline, would you call the roll, please?
Bruce Stamen,
Here.
Kevin Morissette. Sandy Markey.
Here,
Michael Marcotte. Present. Darcy Reed.
Here.
Noam Angsel.
Here.
And it appears that Walter Hill and Paul Medora are not present. And two staff persons that are here tonight is Gil Arsenault and David Hediger.
Thank you. Considering the fact that we have two full voting members absent at the moment, I'll appoint both Darcy and Norm to full voting status for at least until such time, if someone shows up. Okay, so. This is a meeting about the comprehensive plan before us. I'm assuming this may be nearly the last one. Good. Kevin has his fingers crossed. Kevin has his fingers crossed, he didn't say it. I would remind everyone that if they choose to speak, that they pull the microphone over, including staff, that they pull their microphone over so that it can be recorded properly. And the sections that we're working on tonight, Dave, start on page,
229, 230, I guess really 230, because there's a text on 229.
229, which is,
A nice picture.
this is a nice picture of City Hall. Hey, there you go, driving success. All right, and I know that we're nearly done. I'm assuming that there will be some follow-up on some of the previous sections potentially, so. We're working on page, I guess, starting on page 230, implementing the city's comp plan. So, comments from the board. Darcy?
My only question about this one was under fire protection. the second sentence, improvements should be focused on fire department readiness, water supply, or communications. And I'm trying to figure out if that's supposed to be and, or if they're saying we should just pick one focus. I mean, it would seem to me that they would want to work on all three, but
I would think that all three would be an issue. I think that water supply in general is fairly good citywide, although I'm sure there are some areas that are deficient. And this kind of goes back to some of the stuff that had gone on earlier. I know there's been discussion about replacing some of the small substations because of the insufficient facilities that are available there. I know that there's been a study done, right, Dave, about where they really should be.
Yep, and that was actually referenced in another section.
It was referenced in another section, yeah. And the ISO score, do you know what the ISO score is for the city of Lewiston?
it says it's 2, doesn't it?
Yeah, it says 2 right there.
Oh, it's a 2, okay. Okay, so that's
But I
pretty,
can't tell you what that is on a scale of, that's, you know,
it's on a scale of 1 to 10.
One.
2 is
1
that,
1 to 2, I think.
is that good, or is that?
Yeah,
One-
it's good.
One's the best, I believe.
1 is the best, so we're only one step below the best?
Yeah. A lower score indicates better fire protection.
Okay. Okay, great.
So the class 2 is referencing?
Is referencing where we're at currently, and that affects every individual's homeowner's policy as far as fire protection, right?
Correct, yeah, I mean, it's based upon fire protection, we talked about this a little bit last time with the flood insurance, same idea. The city's fire protection, what they have available, building codes, what are we enforcing for building codes, all of that gets tied into what the rating of the community is.
Right.
If we didn't have a building code, we'd have a worse score there. If we
Right,
didn't have fire protection, we'd have a much worse score.
right. And the fact that we have a standing fire department rather than a volunteer department raises that score significantly, right? Yeah, okay. And for everybody's edification, just remember, there are actually 3 substations besides Central Station. We have the Central Station, we have one out on Main Street out by the Harley dealership. We have one on Sabata Street right next to the beautiful Family Dollar. And we have one on Lisbon Street up by the Bonos Plaza.
Question.
Yes, Norm?
That ISO score, are you saying that a insurance company would actually check that score when quoting a fire policy for somebody's home?
Absolutely. That is one of the criterias that they use to determine what they're going to charge you for your homeowner's policy. So the higher that score, the lower your policy rating. Because you know how sometimes even they'll ask you what the distance is to a fire hydrant? But that's all part of this
I kinda knew
water
that they
delivery.
probably looked at that point of it, but I didn't know that it went beyond that.
Yeah, well, I mean, a fire hydrant's great, but if there's no department hook up to it, I mean,
We also are a Class 8 community for floodplain management, which is good. Ratepayers get a discount of what, 10%, David? Or is it 15? Because we go above and beyond the minimum standard, so if you have to have flood insurance, you're saving a little bit.
So is the scale the opposite for flood than it is for water? I mean, for fire?
It's different. There's also a building code number as well, and our number is a little lower because we're using the state codes, and those are 2009 codes, and the 2015 codes are out.
So the lower
So
the
two
score,
cycles behind.
the lower the score for fire is better, but the higher the score for,
Lower for community rating too. 10 is what you get if you meet the objectives for the flood.
and we only have an 8?
We have an 8, which is, I think, one of the lower ones in the state. I think there might be a 7 somewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to get below
Yeah,
7.
yeah.
You have to start doing a lot in your community to, every year we have to provide a report to FEMA as to what we're doing as far as managing our records for FEMA. Thank you. Managing our records with FEMA, how many projects have happened in the flood zone? Are we doing standard operating procedures as far as cleaning out catch basins, culverts, things like that? So we've looked at trying to get a 7, but it's a lot more work for, not that it isn't worth it, but it's just a lot more work.
So we're one of just a few communities in the state that does it.
Okay. Anything else from anyone as far as that?
I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go off track here a little bit. Wouldn't that be a good bullet point when we advertise in the Portland area to get people to come and live in Lewiston, that IISO rating is very high, along with other bullet points?
I assume that that would be a selling point. I don't know if you can get the realtors to understand the difference between a 2 as an ISO rating on fire and an 8 on
I think
some
that
of the
should be
others,
There
but
should be a collaboration between the realtors and the city itself. To try to get real estate people that can live up here.
I would agree. If we could only get the Portland paper to put anything positive in for us, that would be a huge thing. I mean, so, yeah. And I think, there's a lot of misconception too about, I mean, our crime rate is actually significantly lower than both Portland and Bangor's, but everybody seems to think of us as, it's the Detroit of Maine, and actually that's Parkman. It's a community that used to be 835 people, is now 833, and their murder rate is like 6 times what that of Lewiston is. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that we end up people from away seem to think that it's dangerous here, but if you actually read the statistics, it's not borne out by the fact, so. Mike?
Still on fire.
We're on page 230, wherever you want to go.
Because I did have 3 items, should be real quick, kind of progressing towards the third one. On page 231, under projects, plans, policies, and initiatives, I think there's a duplication, where it says, in addition to existing plans and studies, including the Riverfront Master Plan, the Downtown Neighborhood Action Plan, the Lewiston Downtown Neighborhood Action Plan,
And the Lewiston Downtown Neighborhood.
and the Lewiston Downtown Neighborhood Circulation Study. I think the second
Downtown plan.
Downtown Neighborhood Action Plan is duplicative.
Correct.
The only difference is they put the word Lewiston in front of downtown as the one above.
Yep, good.
The other one probably needs a little more explaining. Under Parks and Recreations, in the paragraph above, population growth anticipated through 2030 creates demand for 9 additional park or recreation facility acres to maintain the city's current service delivery standards. What are the statistics behind that, like the population?
That was
Well, that was the one where they had 1.9 acres per person, I think, rather than per 1,000 people.
no, you're right.
That may have.
But it is cross-referencing that earlier statistic that they provided where they were projecting the growth of the community and what, I guess, basically the recreation industry looks at as far as what's a recommended area for residents. And I know we talked about that, and that was one of the typos, was that it was per person, not, or per thousand versus per person.
Well, my thinking is maybe incorporated in that paragraph should be the population growth number as well as the ratio number that you just mentioned.
Yep, we can do that. Just makes it clear.
Michael, go ahead.
If we're done with that,
Well, are we done with pages 230 and 231 at this point?
third one's back in 230.
Oh, come back to it then. You wanna go back? Yeah, come back to 230?
Okay. Under balanced budget, I'm having some heartburn over this one. I'm looking for a reword. Currently, it reads, keep a balanced budget for the city, including the school budget, that does not borrow large sums of money from fund balances or reserves to cover regular operating expenses. Sounds like 2 or 3 compound thoughts. I think we're mandated by charter to have a balanced budget, correct? So I'm not even sure why that needs to be in there. So I'm looking for something more in line with continue debt reduction efforts, including enterprise funds. little simpler. No, it's not continuing something that's already in place. It's not suggesting to keep something that's already mandated by charter. I'm not particularly fond of the operating expenses. I have an idea why that's there. I happen to disagree with the concept that we should not borrow money when we're doing large projects that may include operating expenses. If we're doing a capital improvement in the city but using in-house labor, this would suggest that we should not be using that in-house labor because we would be borrowing money to pay operating expenses. That's why I'm against that phrase. So I'd be more inclined to go with something like continue our debt reduction efforts, including enterprise funds. Everyone probably knows that we have a ordinance in place that attempts to reduce our debt 20% of the average of the last 3 years pay down. And that's what I mean by continue. One thing that doesn't really get incorporated in that concept is enterprise funds. And enterprise funds, I look at it as, okay, it's fee-driven, it's paid by fees, but the heavier the debt gets on those, the higher the fees go. It's just taxed by another name. In most cases, it once was a tax. That stormwater fee was once in the operating account, in the general fund. We keep separating things out, and takes it out of the model for reducing our debt, and we continue. And that's what I truly mean by remember Detroit. It wasn't the policing item.
Okay. Because it's part of the city ordinances as it exists, does that section even need to be in there at all?
I actually thought about that this weekend. It could be eliminated altogether.
Because, what happens occasionally, particularly from the school budget, is, if you end up either remodeling or rebuilding a school or building a new school, all of a sudden you bust that 20% very easily. But that's not to say that that's an inappropriate borrowing at some points in time. Like the $9 million we borrowed for the middle school, that probably staved off $30 million or $40 million worth of new debt if we had to go and build a new middle school. So the 9 at very low interest rates, and we know that going forward, there will be some amount of debt service that will be local for the new elementary school. The state doesn't fund 100% of most of those projects. There are always pieces and parts of those that are, they'll pay for a certain percentage of it, but they get buy-in from the local community to pick up a piece of every school project that's out there just about. I don't think there's any question with a 900-kid elementary school that we're talking about that there won't be some amount of local participation in it that will come in the next 2 or 3 years. We're still looking at an elementary school probably opening in the fall of 2018. So it's actually, since we're almost to the point of starting the fiscal 2016 budget, that's right around the corner. So I would wonder why that particular piece, the balanced budget piece, since it's controlled by the ordinance and it's affected by things like that from the school, why we would even put that in there. I mean, I'm not convinced that that's what's going to drive success, because I think sometimes your hands get tied on that one, and I think my sense would be to just eliminate that whole little paragraph completely. I don't know whether you'd agree, Mike, or.
If that was the best result I could get for a change, I probably would agree. I do think it drives success, though, to continue to work on a debt reduction. You made a good point with schools. We had I believe we've been in this ordinance plan for about 6 years now. It was pitched in 2009, I remember that. At that time, it was only 3%. Probably the fall of 2011, just before calendar year 2012, when staff came back to the Finance Committee and asked for that number to go from 3% to 20%. I suspect that there was a lot of concern with how our debt was structured at the time and wanted to be a little more aggressive. I don't have one particular chart that I'd love to have right now in this packet, but it does show how much was reduced each year and when that ordinance was breached. And I believe it was breached on 2 occasions, at least on one. And the one year that it was breached, it was so significant, it's gonna take several years to even get back to where we were. And that was the middle school. I believe the project itself was $9 million.
Something like that.
For some reason, I have numbers like 14 and 16, probably 14 million that the municipal debt went up that year.
Yeah.
And that number was like three times anyway, the number that the ordinance was proposing. So it may be a good passage to have in the comp plan to keep people reminded that this needs to be a target, just like the larger heading above says, target setting. Because if we don't make it our target, we will end up in a situation such as Detroit or coming winds for Chicago, unintended, a windy city. I hadn't taken the time before the meeting to come up with the exact language, but I would favor something along the lines of what I said earlier.
Looks like the 2012 to 2013 fiscal year, Mike, is when that happened.
Yeah, that's what,
That's
I
when it
actually have it, actually, I think you can see the pencil mark coming through the
It's
photograph.
right there, I think, it's right there. Yeah. Everybody see that on the page?
That's the last page.
There was the last page near the top. You can see in where it says direct debt, and then the second line item is school. If you look at 2012, it's 36,920,000, and 2013, it's 48,886. That's basically the middle school. And that was one of the things that pushed the debt limit ceiling on the ordinance restriction. It pushed it right over the edge, but it was just one of those things that, you know, probably there was no real better solution to that particular item at that time. And I'm afraid we'll see that again in 2017 or 2018.
With respect to,
The new elementary school, there will be some new debt service acquired.
but that one will only be 5%.
It would only be 5%, but it could be a significant amount.
Yes,
It could be several $1 million, even 5%. Even 5% of that project, that project could be anywhere between $40 and $50 million. So 5% could be $2.5 million.
But there won't be no money
It's,
for a little tiny facade that doesn't even look good.
well, there was a lot more than that to the project, obviously. There was a huge infrastructure change, but it didn't show.
And that may be the number of 9 million, approaching 14 for that year.
Yeah.
One thing else about this particular graphic, obviously I started this long before the current financial reports. It includes the water, sewer, and stormwater. A couple pages before this, you'll notice there's a chart that looks like this. Yeah. take 3 pages off of this. Seems like a moving target sometimes, because the way numbers are presented can include stuff or take things out, depending on what year, and as a layperson, it's very difficult to keep track. But if you'll notice on the chart that we've been looking at, the grand total doesn't take changes into consideration. So if we look at 2004, where we were $102 million in debt, looking at the same items today, in 2014, we're $164 million. If we just look at where the break is between '07 and '08, when we start with 125, you can see some progression up, slight decrease, big increase. And in 2012, there was believe that there was a delay in bonds. That's why there's a big drop. Then it came back up to the same number of 169. It's down to 164. We'll see how 2015 ends up. But regardless of having that ordinance in place since 2009, it still seems that we're trending up. And a lot of that comes on the back of the stormwater. There's a lot of debt instrumentation going into stormwater. So that's why I didn't really want to take the language out of the comp plan. I just wanted to reword it, and for Paul's benefit. What I was suggesting earlier is replacing some language under balanced budget on page 230 to read something to the effect of continue our debt reduction efforts, including enterprise funds.
So Mike, on this table that you gave us, table 8, the legal debt margin calculation, and for the last 10 years, the legal debt limit is set by the legislature? Is that right? This first number, the debt limit?
Yeah, by state statute, I believe.
That the city would still be considered solvent if it had incurred that massive amount of debt? Or what is that number?
I'm not sure on the definition of solvent, but the first number at the top, the $2,157,000,000, is our total estimated actual valuation. And that's based on assessors determining what our valuation is. And then by state statute, the legal debt limit is 15%.
Of that,
323 million.
565.
Municipal and school, whereas in the past, the enterprise funds were included, but now I'm learning that those items do not fall under the same categories, because that is suggestive of being a misrepresentation. They've changed it to look more like this one that's in the current 2014 annual report. It says that municipal and school is 110 million. And then the overlapping debt, which is included from LA Water Pollution Control and the 911 Committee, it's another 11 million for a total of 121. And that says that we can borrow up to another 201 million. I don't think that's very advisable. I don't think administration would ever suggest it. If so, then there wouldn't be an effort to have a debt reduction plan on the books. I'm not sure how they devise it. 15% is a cap, a ceiling. I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, something about if we were at 5% or 10%, we may be beyond our capacity to carry that debt load.
I guess one of the questions I have is, according to the other sheet, the last sheet that we had, it shows that the total debt service is based on 164,864,168. Is that right? Right, you have this number.
What table would that be? What table would you?
This last one.
The fifth page in that packet, if you took the top 3 sheets.
That,
This is dead at the top.
yeah,
Debt.
that currently there's 164,864,000. but yet that the only debt that's applicable to the limit's 121?
121, that's correct.
Where did the other 40-odd million go?
That's if you look at the water, sewer, and stormwater on either sheet.
Yeah,
Not sure if those numbers come out to be exactly the same, however,
but that's, so this is the enterprise funds that make up the additional 40 million?
and actually they are, no, they're
It
the
looks pretty
same.
close, yeah.
19,954,000 for water, 13,688 for sewer, and 9,586 for stormwater. I suspect adds up to the, what'd you say, 40 million?
About 40, 41 million, yeah, that's about right. Yep, just about. But those don't count against the limit?
They don't count against the. The finance committee for the last 2 or 3 years has sent a budget message that included enterprise funds as a concern, understanding that it had been pulled out or not included in the calculation for the ordinance.
Any questions from the board? I'd like the record to show that Mr. Medora has joined us at about 6 o'clock. Since we're not actually taking motions at this time, actions of the board, I'll leave everybody on the board active at this time. In the event we get to anything that's an actionable item, I'll have to decide which one of the associate members would not be a full voting member. I'll do that if that occurs. So, that was on page 230. We've talked a little bit about 231. Other comments or?
So to be clear, am I changing language under balanced budget?
I guess that's, Mike has proposed some language there. I guess I would look for a thumbs up or thumbs down from the planning board as to whether or not we want to, modify that language a little bit to reflect Mike's concern that there ought to be some consideration for maintaining the debt reduction that is in the ordinance.
To clarify, is the decision between changing the language or removing it completely, or is the decision,
I think that's probably two different decisions.
okay,
I mean, if we decided to take it out completely, we wouldn't need to change the language. If we decide to change the language, it stays in as a section with new verbiage. So I guess I'm kind of looking for direction from other members. I can go either way myself.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, should it be removed, but I do see Mike's point. I'm not sure that's the language. I'm not positive that's the way it should be said, but I think the intent is a good idea.
I have left it so that it's open-ended as I'm reading and rereading. I'm not sure that I like the exact language that I mentioned.
I agree. I do agree.
And I heard a word that I prefer over the one that I used, continue. I'd say maintain. Sounds a little better. Maintaining our debt reduction efforts. And then either put a period there or a comma or something, and then go on to further explain the enterprise funds, because there is no debt reduction plan for the enterprise fund, so to suggest to continue the debt reduction plans for that, there isn't any, so it should probably be worded a little differently.
Right, no,
Folks, yes, no,
We got to close in terms of focusing on the debt reduction.
Pauline,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
Norm?
Agreed.
Yeah, it seems though, Dave, we got a pretty much of a thumbs up on that there's some a little bit of rewording of that to emphasize the debt reduction plan that's currently in place and to potentially include the enterprise funds in that. Is that where you want to go, Mike?
So that you just said,
To emphasize the continuation of the debt reduction plan and to include the potential for reduction in the enterprise funds. That makes sense. Is that enough direction, David?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on these 2 pages? We're nearing the end here, folks, which is, maybe a welcome relief, but, the LCIP, of course, is in here, and it is only a guide, and we know from past experience that some things that are proposed year after year after year, sometimes they do happen and sometimes they don't. But at least it's a good budgeting document. It's a plan that sometimes is sorely lacking. So I'm glad to see that that's in there. We go back to resource allocation and the plan implementation matrix. This goes right back to what we've been saying all along about the lack of staff in the planning and code enforcement office. I think that we somehow that we need to get, if we can't get it through the city council to see, or the administration, to recognize the lack of staff, maybe we could put it in the comprehensive plan, and then if it isn't funded, we could say it's not in conformity with the plan.
Ooh, ooh.
Well, it's, we recognize how critical that is to making this work. And if we could make the position such that the funding of it was the way to get it in conformity with the plan, that may be a backdoor way of getting it, but stranger things have happened.
I like backdoors at times.
Certainly, and we can talk about this more later this evening, but as far as going forward and the opportunity to present your thoughts and recommendations to the city council, that might be a good time to do that as well, to impress upon them that if we're gonna take the plan seriously like the board wants to, in implementing it in some type of fashion, additional assistance is necessary, because I think you're gonna have the opportunity to have a workshop with the council. We gotta figure out when that's gonna be and whatnot still, but that would be a good opportunity to express those thoughts and concerns.
The challenge with that is the city council changes all the
That's true.
time.
No, that's a
So
good
if
point.
it's a little firmer,
No, good point.
I mean, the comp plan is supposed to be a 10 or 20-year document.
right,
That could survive 10 councils.
yeah.
So if it's in here, it makes it more difficult to ignore it. Well, I mean,
But it-
any of this could
It's a
end up on the $1
chance.
million shelf, but I mean, let's
You have a
face it,
shot if
but
you
at
get it
least
in.
if it's in the comp plan, it's a document that sort of sets it out as as a real goal of the implementation of this, and it's harder to ignore when it's in a plan. We've talked a lot about how the Mill and Riverfront plan is setting goals and priorities for down there. The comp plan should be used as as to some degree, this comp plan is a primary policy document for the city. And that, to me, that's a critical piece of this. Appropriate staffing levels to make this work is appropriate for this document. Now, maybe I'm off track there, but
you go back, they've said before, Gil and David said before, at one time there were 12 people up there, or something, right?
Between both departments, yeah.
So, what year, I'm just, in terms of Mike provided us with numbers, I'm just curious of what year was that around?
Well, when I started in the fall of '98, planning had like 3.5 people, basically. And I'd have to think about the code side, but it was the same or more than what's there today, certainly. And then,
and Portland has like,
well, I mean,
I realize
It's apples and
Portland is
oranges, I
different.
think, but
is
Portland is much, they have a lot more staff in both departments, yeah.
And I'm assuming Bangor probably does too.
I'd have to ask Ed, actually, as to what the situation is up there.
Yeah. But I mean, I think we have to use Portland and Bangor as the comparables in the state of Maine for staffing levels, because they're the three largest communities in the state, right?
Correct. No, I think to your points earlier that, I mean, it takes effort to implement this plan, some of it, that was the evening we were talking about, if there was a group of people that wanted to spearhead this, like, what was it, Detroit or whatever, you know? I mean, that would be,
That's great.
that would be even a better way, right? Because you have citizen buy-in into it, and they're the ones initiating, because, I mean, this document's really for the community, so to get the community behind this versus staff and the planning board, that's all well and good, but we want, you know, the community to be excited about this, and they were when we had these discussions, so you get the outreach to do that, because, I mean, a lot of these changes going forward too, as you folks know, I mean, unless they're reading a legal ad or something, they're not gonna know about the changes. I mean, it's hard to get the word out about this stuff. It's after the fact that they find out about it.
Yeah.
So certainly, I mean, I don't wanna sound like I'm, you know, fox watching the hen house. I welcome additional staff, that's great.
But it's just like on page 232, it talks about a community report card. That's an annual event. I mean, with limited staff that we have, that report card is gonna have, I mean, that's gonna fall to a, you know, get around to it type of a scenario.
And like, when that was in there, we were talking initially, like, that's probably not a bad thing to do, right? I mean, it shows that we do the city administrator does the reports on monthly now, but that's more of an update as to, you know, what's going on, you know, just current events. It's not necessarily, did we talk about doing something in January and get it done by December?
Right.
And that's not a bad thing to,
And the report card is a place too that consolidates the good news. And I think that that's one of the, probably the biggest thing that's lacking is our ability to promote the good news. I mean, the perception across the state of Lewiston is, you know, it's unfortunate, and but if we only could produce something that had a lot more good news in it, that perception might change.
no, we've talked about that too, how there are lots of good things going on, but we don't do a good job of celebrating them or telling people, you know, what's actually going on. You're right.
But the report card could be that.
It could be. I mean, I see that almost being more of a tool for staff, the board, the council, as far as, you know, what have we tried to achieve, what haven't we achieved, and is there any, you know, is that important to people? Is that, you know, should we be shifting our emphasis? Is funding necessary? Is funding not necessary? Are we spending time and resources on something we shouldn't be?
I suppose that human resources could use it as a metric for compensation for staff.
I suppose so, yeah. Gotta meet my quota, you know?
And what do you got, Mike? What is it? Number of municipal employees by function, human resources, 0. Oh, so there is no human resources, okay, all right. Excuse me. Thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. It's just,
I was looking at this chart because of the discussion on how many code enforcement, probably doesn't go back far enough. And I probably didn't hear you at the time. How many did you say when you started in 98, 99?
Planning had 3.5 people.
Planning. The
They were
chart-
different departments then.
Yeah, I believe that the chart is development and code enforcement now. And it's 8 or 7. That's what I was looking at.
okay.
But a little bit of shameless advertisement too for the Sun Journal. That wouldn't be a bad idea if somebody, whether it's a human services department or a marketing department, they might come under development, economic development officer. Put together a little flyer. It can be inserted. It can be dropped to just the people in Lewiston. They have the ability to do that. something along the lines of the newsletter. If you take a look at the newsletter, I find certain sections of it very interesting. Other sections are a little tedious. Maybe I don't like the subject as much. Maybe the way it's designed and formatted, it's not as interesting. But I can tell you that when it comes to the projects that are being done, such as in Samad Payne Park, with pictures and paragraph write-up, very interesting. If something like that was put together in a collage, once or twice a year, and sent out to all of the area residents, that'd be a way to promote what Bruce is talking about, the positive aspects of what's happening.
Well, it's probably not a lot. Good.
I try not to say anything negative about city staff, but I think city staff sometimes are their own worst enemy. I don't think that enough is done. We have 2 local newspapers. One is a daily paper, one is a weekly newspaper. The weekly paper always seems to be 5 days behind of what's happening. And I don't think that the local daily paper does the city any service. And I don't think city employees, I thought we had someone who was in charge of public relations or community stuff, the more that's put out there, the better the city looks. The Sun Journal did a great story on a former resident on his $30 million home in Booth Bay, but there are so many other people well deserving in this community to have a 2-day multi-page spread with photos than Paul Coulomb. And granted, he ran a nice business, employed a lot of people, he made $1 billion. I don't care. There's a lot of other things that are happening in this community that deserve that more. And I don't think the city really pushes what's really happening. Twin City Times, they're short-staffed. You know, the mayor writes a weekly column that's controversial. You know, someone else could be putting information in there of what's coming up the following week versus a newspaper that comes out on Thursday that tells you what's going on Thursday night or what happened the night before. It would be really nice for someone to take an aggressive look at what the city is doing, not only for, you know, arts and culture, schools. I mean, the Lewiston Middle School did 2 plays, and I went, and they were poorly attended. And 9 times out of 10, you talk to someone, gee, did you go to middle school and see this play? Oh, there was a play? I didn't know that. I mean, so it's not just city staff, it's even school staff. How hard would it be to put that out there? You see it at Lake Region High School. I mean, Lisbon High School, Sabattis, there are smaller schools, smaller staff, but they certainly get the word out that there's something going on in their community. Why can't we?
You know, and I know I see a lot of those news releases that go out on Notify Me. Dottie does quite a job of doing it. And then half the time, nobody picks it up. I think it is a major failing of the local newspaper in particular, and the news media in general, that they don't really want to publish good news, because that doesn't sell papers. And I'd be interested to know what the actual percentage of households in the city of Lewiston even bother to get that rag.
There is that.
I mean, I bet it's surprisingly low compared to what it used to be.
Mhm.
I know for myself, I get it at the office and I seldom read it, and I get the Portland paper at home, because there's always more in it. If you look at the Monday edition, all
There's
6
12
pages of it. It's sad,
It
you
was
know?
12 pages.
It,
I'm up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I read paper from the front to the
spend
back.
all 6 minutes
Even
reading
those little legal, even those little legal notices, David, I read them.
So there's 2 of us.
You have plenty of coffee left and
No,
nobody.
a lot of people read the legal notices, that seems to have an attraction.
That and the obits, that and the obituaries.
Well, they do, I mean,
Yeah.
that's.
But Bruce is right, when Dottie sends those out, I'm not sure if you folks see it or not, but, because sometimes she sends it out in two formats, and the one goes to, like, all the press and all the media and everything like that, so it's really their decisions if they wanna pick up on it. It goes to the papers, it goes to the local TV affiliates and things like that, so, I mean, yeah, she does maybe a 5 to 10 sentence blurb in hopes that somebody picks it up and calls and runs with it.
Does it go to Portland?
Portland, like the paper, Portland Press, I'd have to look at the email on there. No, go,
It should go, well, if it's not, it should go to them, and it should go to the Dispatch too.
Who does
Dispatch
it,
magazine.
did you say? Who?
Dottie Perry.
Dottie Paramoudier,
Yeah.
she's,
Well, Lincoln, Lincoln's office?
nope, Ed's office, actually, she's Ed Barrett's assistant.
And she puts a lot of them out there.
Yeah. The issue is,
It's regular, I mean, it's,
I mean, it can be like a feel-good project to, they're doing the manhole on Lisbon Street,
Right.
that type of thing.
the issue is sending out press releases, and I've done it many times. You send it out all over the state to everybody. As you said, they don't feel like printing it. In Portland, oh my, they barely ever print anything from Lewiston. They just don't.
Bombard, keep bombarding them.
You know,
Oh, I've
if you've
bombarded
lived, if you've lived in Lewiston long enough, you'll know where all of that stems from. It's the same attitude that has existed for a long time. And I, not just having been a newsboy myself, but having lived here all my life, except minus 4 years for school, for college. And I understand it. There's always been criticism aimed at Lewiston, whether it's cultural or political, and it's become an art form in some circles. Portland's one of them. So I would never expect them to pick up on any news that we would publish. And even the things that they do publish, they deliberately ignore the balloon festival. If it's said after the fact. So there are periodicals intended to bring this news to the public, and it's left deliberately. You're not left with any other option other than to say they've just left it out. And that's the way it is. We're not going to change these people other than to persist in letting people know what we have in Lewiston. But the proof's in the pudding. You have to come to Lewiston to understand there's a lot more here than what's perceived. People that come here, that's what they decide.
Sure.
So I'm not bothered by it. It's like trying to arm wrestle a ghost, you know? We need to keep doing what we're doing, but we're not going to be recognized for it, particularly if we're perceived as competing with Portland, which is, I don't say that's laughable, but I think we should try to compete with Portland. Portland is a huge city. It's got tremendous assets. It's got an incredible equity. The equity base in Portland dwarfs anything that we have here in the state. That doesn't mean that we should always take it on the chin. I'd be interested in hearing from Kristen on what the council perceives to be the fundamental problem with attitudes that seem to prevail regarding Lewiston. May I ask her a question?
sure, absolutely, certainly.
Kristen, what's the perception?
It's not really a question that we've addressed as a council, I don't think. So I can't tell you.
So it doesn't come up? Okay, fair enough.
I mean, everybody that's on the council recognizes.
Everyone, yeah, I mean, it's the same conversation that you're having here.
Yeah. To me, if they would, if the newspaper would get rid of the guy that writes the inflammatories, it would help tremendously. But, that guy is the biggest detriment to the city of Lewiston's reputation that ever existed. He gets more column inches than anybody else.
Who's that?
Mark Laflamme.
Well, it's water off a duck's back. It's water off a duck's back is my point. We just need to do the right thing, and we need to be prudent about how we spend. I commend Mike for the contribution that he makes on the planning board, bringing these, making sense of all these figures. Mike, you have the uncanny ability of putting your finger on things, and I need that kind of help because I'm not a numbers guy. But I noticed that whenever I go to Mass at the Basilica, literally dozens and dozens and dozens of families leave Portland and come to Lewiston and attend Mass here. Now, there's got to be a reason why that happens. They come to the Basilica. The Basilica is being featured more. You're not going to get consent from that from the public. People aren't going to recognize the fact that families that live in Portland come here to worship. You're not gonna, no one's gonna tell you that, but it's happening all around us. There are many things that are happening in Lewiston that people refuse to recognize. Since I've been involved in the planning board, I find that we have an administration that is compatible. It's very compatible with citizens' concerns. That wasn't my perception. I have to admit, it wasn't the intent perception that I had initially, although I've known Gil for quite many years, and I've never known David since I've served on the board. But the point of the matter I'm saying is that we have a great deal to offer, and we ought not to be looking over our shoulder in our rearview mirror all the time to how people feel about us.
Yeah, I agree.
We just can't. It's a waste of energy. It's not discussed on the, it doesn't mean that the council doesn't have any thoughts on it. I'm sure they do. Most of the people that are serving on council have been here a number of years and are capable of giving their own opinion on that. But we have to decide what's right for Lewiston, not what's right for Portland or any other city for that matter. That's my 2 cents, probably 3 cents.
Michael?
Are we still on driving success?
We are still on driving, I'm sorry, we still are on driving success. You've got something else. You've got this one
No,
else.
it's not really something new, it's, trying to find the right phrase, kind of an extension of what Bruce brought up earlier on staffing. I think under resource allocation would be a good place to have another subparagraph similar to capital improvement plan that is entitled staffing. And have a small paragraph, a line or two, that talks about right-fitting code and planning in order to derive the success that this chapter is the theme of. Because if we don't right-fit planning, code and planning, I don't know how we can drive success. I don't know if that's enough.
I think there's, well, I don't know, is that enough to work with, Dave, or?
Is, again, I guess is there consensus to?
There's definitely, it looks like, from the head nods, I'd say there's consensus there, yes.
So, yeah, we'll add another bullet. Is there preference as to what that's called? That,
Staffing?
Under the resource allocation? It's maybe just a bullet paragraph of, you know. And I like the word right-sizing, because that can change over the next 10 years. It might be that one person this year makes it work, but it might be that we need to add 2 people 3 years from now to right-size it. I think that's a really, that's a good segue into that. And I think we all recognize that that is a cost to the taxpayer, but it may ultimately be a very appropriate resource allocation, and that those costs are brought back many times over with appropriate utilization of staff's time. Just because there's a body there, if that, it doesn't necessarily have to be considered overhead, if they're really producing good work. Am I?
And for the people who weren't here last week or during this segment of the meeting, I wouldn't mind seeing an immediate implementation on the use of the funds that would have been directed in another place, meaning the request that was before us for land acquisition.
Oh.
Whatever the number is.
15, or whatever it was, yeah.
It's still,
Yeah, that's still out there, so, yeah. Yep. Anything else on the pages 230 to 232? This is nearing the end here, thankfully. I'm sure David is thinking it's thankfully that we're nearing the end.
well, I mean, you guys are setting a record tonight. We did 3 pages in an hour, so.
Hey, there we go. Hey, listen, we're on a roll, buddy. So the next section, unless somebody else has something on those 3 pages, is talking about the implementation matrix. And I think that goes right back to what Mike and I were just talking about, is, you know, this implementation is going to require staffing to focus on this and to force this to the forefront in the public eye and for the council, for the planning board, for everybody, staff included, to make this happen. Or else it just becomes another dust collector on the $1 million shelf, which I hope this plan never ends up being accused of. Darcy,
Oh, I had a comment on page 2.
page 2, yeah?
It's talking about establish a TIF district in the downtown to support local businesses. I was wondering, maybe I'm the only one who was confused about this.
Where are you, Darcy? Right
The bottom,
at the bottom?
under policies and programs,
Yeah,
the third one down.
yep.
I was just wondering if it needs clarification that that's just about businesses and not about other things that could be considered to be businesses, like nonprofits wanting to build subsidized housing.
Would that,
I mean, that's been an issue of having TIFs for those types of projects in downtown. So I'd just like to clarify that that's for commercial businesses, not residential types of businesses or organizations.
So maybe to offer some clarification, all of these, the left-hand column is this is all cross-referenced to sections in there. So for example, if you go back to 170, that's where you see the specific reference to setting up a tax increment financing downtown district. And then the departments that they recommended and the goals that the consultant has proposed for a time frame. I guess to Darcy's point, and this could be ongoing for most of these, if there's a concern, the idea I think would be to go back to finding that section and see where it's referenced. It doesn't necessarily say anything about specifically nonprofits or housing or anything like that, but it just talks about the downtown area.
It talks about like suburban development projects on 170.
Yep. Well, has been used for that's where it's talking about how it has been used, and the recommendation is to try to shift those TIFs into the downtown area.
Dave, would there be a way in this matrix to reference back the specific page codes like you just did in
Yeah,
each of these? Would there be a way to add that as a column?
That would be helpful. I would suggest I'm gonna suggest that be held off until really the final draft, because those page numbers are likely to change as
Yeah.
the document gets adopted here,
Yeah,
just because of the additions and deletions you folks have put in.
yeah. But I think that would be a very helpful cross-reference, to say this is referring back to in section, that's actually the section of prioritize economic vitality, right? 170,
Correct.
yeah.
Yep, so like the top there has the section we're in prior, when you look at the matrix there.
Yeah.
That's the whole section that we're discussing.
That whole section falls under that, but some specific notation might be handy to allow people to, when they look at this, to go back and forth, because there is a lot more information in the prior pages than that one sentence would typically indicate. Yes, Paul?
Well, I want to digress just for a minute here to get clarification on something. David, you mentioned that there would be an opportunity in the future to have a workshop with the city council. Now, has anybody on this board had the experience of having a workshop with the city council? Have you found it useful?
Well,
Now, you see, I didn't plan this. The prevailing wisdom in a court of law is never ask a question if you don't know the answer. And I didn't know the answer to that, but I did one, and I found it to be the most unproductive, I guess. It's not, and this is not to reflect poorly on the council, it's the way the whole thing was structured, okay? I just want to I want to make myself clear here so that you're not the bearer of bad news to the rest of the council. No, seriously, because that for me meant that there would be an opportunity to have an exchange, a meaningful exchange with city council on these matters. Now, I am a very optimistic individual, I really am. I have that attitude, and I don't need to hear it from other people, but the point is, if I go to the city council anticipating a workshop, I would like to have a workshop where there'd be a dialogue with council. Even if, look, council can prevail on all of this stuff, right? Council's gonna prevail on all of this, whether they're gonna accept it as is or as recommended, and it's gonna go, it might even fall under the hammer, who knows? But the point is, will we have a dialogue with council? Please do not mention that if you intend for us to have a bona fide work session with council.
So jumping ahead to build upon this discussion here, I've talked to Ed about the request by you folks, because we had that very early on to have a workshop to provide the dialogue on your discussions, on your recommendations. And Ed's open to having that. From my perspective, I really need you guys to lead that discussion. I can be there to back you up and support what I've heard and everything like that, but you folks are providing a recommendation on this plan, and it's only gonna be that much more, it does me no good, and I'm not sure it does you folks good, for me to sit there and say, this is what the planning board's concerns were. I mean, you guys, they can read it, you can read it, but if you guys initiate that discussion and try to get that conversation going, I think to your point, Paul, it'll be a more useful conversation, because you're right, some of the workshops we've had, everybody just kind of sits there and nods their heads. Right, and some of them have been more productive than others. I think this is a big enough deal that things that you folks are passionate about, because my goal here is to have basically a recommendation drafted for you folks that you can work from. And we're probably gonna need to go through the sections again to make sure that you folks are okay with the recommendations that I believe I've captured from you folks. And we can get more into that in those meetings, but then when that's done, I think you folks are really gonna need to initiate that conversation, make sure there is a conversation versus, here are our recommendations, any questions?
I want to remain optimistic that we can have this dialogue. It doesn't mean that we have to prevail, and I don't think there should be any doubt in anybody's mind that we can't reiterate, whether or not we can reiterate what our concerns are. I think we're capable of doing that. There's enough passion on this board to last a lifetime. And we can bring these concerns to council. And council, obviously, in the end, will deliberate on their own, and we respect that. But I'd like to see, at least see an opportunity, and
Yep, we're working to make that happen.
okay. All right, fine, good.
I mean, that's what I can offer you at this point.
If you really want to see a discouraging workshop, watch the two city councils get together and do a workshop.
When they send out the agenda for that work session, like it could say in the agenda, like this is gonna be, this is meant to be a discussion as opposed to a presentation.
Right.
So that everyone sort of comes prepared with that being the focus.
I've marked my book entirely with footnotes on areas that everyone has mentioned as recommendations for change. I won't be at a loss for finding out where I am and what the recommendation was. On the other hand, I want to share this concern that, I mean, we can belabor this, and we can create such a magnitude of work for the planning staff that this could be insurmountable. I don't want to do that. We ought to be able to come up with what you've heard us say and are recommending. We can correct it along the way. I don't want to belabor that process, because I don't think we have resources to do that. I don't think you have resources to rethink this again and meet and present.
Yeah.
We can just,
Oh, absolutely, we could beat it to death.
yeah.
Yep, Kevin?
To Paul's point, has city council been through this kind of like we're doing? I mean, probably not is my guess, but
Not until after this,
not until after.
just after when you make your recommendations.
Then you're gonna go through.
And I don't know.
Go through it section by section, yeah.
I don't know. It will-
Yeah, I mean,
think the expectation is that everyone should be doing that. I don't,
yeah, I mean, I've talked a little bit about that with Ed, and my
So that's-
impression is they're gonna defer to you folks, because you guys have spent so much time on this, and so that's why I think you're gonna need to kind of lead the discussion as far as, hey, we've spent, a ton of time on this, these are our concerns, this is our recommendation with these caveats and whatnot, we'd like to go forward. And then at that point, after the workshop, if the council really wants to dive into it and do the same thing you folks are doing,
so there are Right, so Michael Chance and I both were on the comp plan,
Think tank, right.
think tank.
Think tank.
So I know that at least two of us have gone through it carefully.
Now, have you been reporting back to the council in any capacity at all in regards to discussions that are taking place here?
No, because there's no real opportunity to do that.
Okay.
And I know that that's gonna happen
Right,
eventually.
right.
And I really, I think it's important for you as a board to make those arguments and to have that discussion. I don't,
At the workshop?
yeah, I mean, I don't want my own, you know, I guess, take on things to sort of come through with what I'm saying. So I think it's important for you all to
Well-
have that voice.
Well, it begs the question, Councilor Cloutier, is it Cloutier or Cloutier? Cloutier. You've been attending a lot of these meetings, and obviously you have a high level of personal interest in the comprehensive plan. And I was just wondering if you'd had an opportunity to share those perceptions with the council. That was my question, basically.
No, because there's no, unlike, so the Auburn City Council, I think, appoints people in individual committees and they give report backs at each of the meetings. We don't have that on our agenda. It's not part of our regular meetings.
So is the think tank gonna be part of that workshop with the council?
No, I can certainly make them aware of it. I mean, the think tank was basically almost a committee to vet the formatting and the ideas and going through this process. At this point, it's been handed off to you folks. You folks are it. You are the keepers of this document here in providing a recommendation for the council. We'll certainly let people know, the think tank included, when that workshop happens, when those council meetings happen and whatnot.
So David, by saying that the council is going to defer to our expertise and our judgment on this, does that mean that's going to be universal going forward on every recommendation we make?
I mean, I like to think historically, I mean, this varies from council to council, but historically, in my tenure, they do defer to you folks. I mean, if there's a unanimous recommendation coming from you folks, they usually go with it. There's usually not a lot of discussion. Absolutely.
Going through the walls, I think.
No, if they were given 10 recommendations from you guys, they probably questioned 2 of them.
And rejected all the others.
I don't think so, really. You know? I mean, but we've had councils in the past, and actually those councils tend to be made up of past planning board members, where I go to the council and it's like going to the planning board all over again because they have an interest and they put on their planning board hats.
I just hope, based on Paul's concern, that it doesn't become, us saying, what we found, and then the council's just like, okay, thank you, next, and, because they're gonna look at it anyways. That's why I asked the question. Have they had a chance, or, I mean, they've had the document.
Yeah, that's what I want to flesh out now in this conversation here.
And I don't think that's clear, based on,
It's totally up to the individual councils
Yeah.
if they've spent time.
if
with
they
it or
spent
not.
time actually doing
Yeah,
it, so
and I don't have any delusions that there's gonna be a rubber stamp on this.
I don't think that either.
And that's just the way it is. I mean, that's however you want to slice it. And I respect the decision of the council. And I try to include that reality in my thoughts when I look at something and say, well, should I comment or just let it go? Because the council's gonna do what it feels it needs to do. At the end of the day, when the dust settles, that's what's gonna happen.
I mean, I'll let you guys determine when I have all the comments provided, but to that point, your recommendations, I'm 3/4 of the way done, typing in all the typos and comments and whatnot, but I haven't done all the comments because you're just comments on a lot.
Yeah.
When you have changes that you recommended, those are in
Concrete.
there. Exactly. So those types of things in there, my guess is the council is probably gonna look at you guys and understand that you guys talked a lot about them. I mean, I don't think a lot of the changes you folks have made are necessarily controversial. I mean, I think it's a lot of it
I think
is,
so. That's my sense, but I could be wrong.
David, do we still have a time frame of trying to present this for a ratification by the standing council?
so the conversation I had today with Ed to give him a heads up is, I see us having 1 or 2 more meetings with you folks to iron out the recommendations as to what we're gonna provide the council. and then have a workshop. So by mid to end July, I should have a good sense from you folks as to what that recommendation is gonna be. And then we're either gonna go to the council in August or September. Right now, the council only has one meeting in August, and we need to have a workshop. We're not doing this on a regular night, so unless the council decides to have a special meeting in August, it'll probably happen in September. So right now, I'm looking at August, September for some type of discussion with the council.
So hopefully by end of October, we would be able to get a thumbs up or thumbs down from the council?
I would hope so. I mean, it depends on what the council does with it. I mean, we'll get a sense, but from my perspective, I don't know why we couldn't do that. I don't think what you folks are recommending for changes is such a diversion from what we heard in the community and things like that, that we're gonna have to revisit this and keep on having the discussion over and over again.
I just would not want the time frame to end up such that the ratification came from a lame duck council.
No, that's understood.
I mean, I think that could taint the whole thing. And after all the work we've put into it and the time that the folks that did on this have put into it, I would hate to see that be the end result.
That would inflict a mortal wound on the planning board if that's what would happen.
I think it would affect the plan maybe more than the planning board.
Well,
Because, I mean, the planning board, ultimately, the planning board, sort of, our terms run longer than the city council's.
yes, I understand that, but it also, it's foreboding,
It could be, yeah. I mean, we would have no way of there's no way of predicting, what would happen. I mean, there have been times when all 7 councilors are changed, and that just sets a dynamic up that I think is difficult for us. If we've spent time working with the standing council and 2 members of the council were on the think tank, and then all of a sudden to have, a whole new slate, the learning curve for them at the council level is fairly steep, and as Kristen can probably attest, the first 2 years are hell on wheels, right? You get almost, 2 meetings before they start throwing budget at you? Yep.
I would say I think many of the recommendations that you have made have been felt particularly controversial.
nothing jumps out at me.
Is your sense that if we make a firm recommendation, that the council would stand behind it?
It's in the plan, you didn't say to delete it before?
And I'm I haven't been here for everything either, but the ones that I have been here for, I think,
Raising from day one.
were some of the more controversial ones, like the housing one, and I didn't feel like that was, like, anything that felt recommended there was out of line either, so.
Sell their property to us.
Well, that's really good feedback for us, I think. Darcy?
Can I just say, just kind of along the lines of trying to get this passed with the council that we have now, no offense to anybody on the board, but we might want to just stay focused then, because I feel like we've kind of gone here, there, and everywhere in a lot of our meetings, and I think we need to just stay focused and get through it. I mean, we just need to be efficient.
Yes. Yep. Mike?
Something that Dave mentioned about you taking down all of the specific requests for changes, but don't have actually a written record of a lot of the other comments. And it reminded me of some back and forth the last several weeks. We heard early on that these meetings were supposed to be placed on Great Falls.
Yeah, we were gonna attempt to do that. We thought we were gonna be able to, and, we can potentially, but scheduling it makes it challenging because of the length of the meetings and squeezing the time in there. We had a conversation with Great Falls early on, and I think we got one of them up there, and then after that, kind of fell apart.
I don't see where the difficulty lies. The city councils of both cities, town councils, selectmen are posted real quick. The site has a heavy load of video time. It's not, I don't believe that they're lacking in space to have ours up there. I think we need to make an effort to get those up there. We promised everyone that they would be. And there are people out there that keep going to the site hoping to see them. A number of people I know watched the first one, asking, okay, where's the others?
Yeah, I wish they had contacted me, because we would have made maybe a better effort to do that, because I haven't heard anything, but, we can look to see if they can have some kind of catalog on there or something. Mike's expressed this concern to me, and one thing I was actually thinking about, now, I know you can do it, but I need to talk to MIS about it, is whether or not we could either like make a YouTube channel or something like that, where the stuff is on there, so it's just accessible at any time.
That would have to be downloaded on YouTube, right? Somebody'd have to
Right.
record this thing and then download it.
Well, they're all being
Or
recorded
upload-
right
upload
now.
it, I should say.
I mean, we have them all recorded, it's just a matter of getting them onto some service that people can view them, at their
Upload,
leisure.
yeah.
Kristen,
Has a co-
Kristen?
Yeah, I would just second what Mike said. I mean, I think that if he told people that was gonna happen, then that needs to happen.
Yeah, we,
Way, shape, or form, and, I think that would actually be really helpful before the workshop with counselors, so that, if they haven't been reading the plan, they can at least reference the planning board meeting that was in relation to the section we're gonna be talking about, and hear what the comments are beforehand.
Pauline?
I think you can actually go to Great Falls TV, the website, and you can look at past city council meetings. So there's
I've
no,
done that, yeah.
so that's a possibility. Doing live broadcasts is where the issues were.
Okay.
Because what happens is, we're meeting Monday night, normally Auburn has a meeting, so they can only live broadcast one.
Right.
But I mean, these could be edited to take out the chatter prior to the start of the meeting, which,
Channels.
I'll go right on board. My husband says there's a lot of chatter because Dave starts the recording prior to the start of the meeting. So there's a lot of, not off color, but there's a lot of chatter prior to the start of the meeting, and those would have to be edited out.
Housekeeping details.
But they could be put up on the internet. They wouldn't be broadcast necessarily on TV, but they would be archived and they could be watched on the internet.
Because right now, there's one meeting archive.
right.
And so
Yeah.
they have created the bucket for us,
Right.
and there's one video.
Yeah, because that was the one that we were able to get them to broadcast as well, so I'll see if we can make it happen, I mean, it's.
But the caveat's gonna be if Auburn takes over by, it's not eminent domain, but if they go up to Central Maine Community College, grab all the equipment, throw it in their basement and take over Great Falls TV, which is what they wanna do, I think that the archive of anything other than city council meetings is not gonna be there, unless if Lewiston wants to pay.
I mean, I don't understand.
I know Phil is having that conversation with Auburn. And my understanding is that we're willing to continue, our contract with Great Falls TV as long as they're willing to keep doing it, so I'm hopeful that that will happen.
I don't think the transition, no, from what little I know, that the transition isn't going to be as is being portrayed, that it's gonna happen quickly. It's just a matter of moving, and I'll use a layman term, moving the VCR box over to another building and hooking it up, and you can put the tape in and it's gonna work. It's
Yeah.
not that simple.
My understanding is that it's gonna cost a lot more than they Auburn originally thought it was.
Yeah, and my understanding was, at least initially, was that Great Falls was a collaboration between the two communities, and that there was, that, for Auburn to think that they're just, I mean, I thought it was a 50-50 split. The funding comes from each and every subscriber to the local cable system, and I don't see where Auburn gets off thinking that they can just seize control and take it. I think that Lewiston ought to put up a defense and say, whoa, stop that and leave it like it is. It's not great, but it certainly could be made much worse, by having it lie only in Auburn. I think that we, as a community, especially the larger of the two communities, and probably we have more subscribers and we're paying more into the system to support that than Auburn is, I think that the community ought to take a really hard stance, and the council should be leading the charge and say, that's enough, stop that, we're not going to allow it to happen, and end that whole discussion. I think it's ridiculous that it's even out there. Paul?
Well, has this come to council for discussion? No.
Bill is
Phil Netto.
It's been discussed at Auburn, and Auburn appears to be in favor of taking it over.
Not purchase, just take over.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as, I mean, that's not how contracts work, and that's not how collaboration works. If this is, you know, the junior partner doesn't just decide that he's gonna run the show.
Yeah, I don't know the details around what ownership currently is, so I can't.
Boy, this is another mystery.
Well, it's another power grab from the west side of the river. Pauline?
I think when the presentation was made by their city manager, their IT guy couldn't explain a whole lot of things when asked specific questions by some city councilors. The answer was, gee, I don't know, I'll have to research that and get back to you. And so I really was jumping into something where you don't know the cost, don't know how it's gonna actually get done, other than, yep, we can do it, we can actually make a turnaround in 3 weeks. It's not gonna happen. Time Warner hadn't even been consulted about moving the wires and the cables and.
And that's a big piece of this, is the Time Warner piece of it.
I mean, when you consider the, when you,
The Time Warner, because they, I think, either own the equipment or lease the equipment from them, or
when you consider the fact that Time Warner keeps saying that they can't even run the link so that they could tape the school board meetings up at the Dingley building, I can't imagine thinking you're gonna shift the whole studio operation in just in a blink of an eye, and that there's no cost associated with it. Is part of the reason. I mean, the school board thing to me is it's critical that those meetings also be part of that. And if Auburn takes it over, there's not a chance of that happening. I think it's, you know, to me, it's just a total.
So I'll contact Great Falls and I'll see if we can, get these all online, or if there's another mechanism that we can do that, and then at the same time I can kind of advertise that these are available, whatever avenue I can find to make these things viewable, and then make the world know that. And I guess maybe to Kristen's point, absolutely make that known before we start having the council workshops and discussions, so people want to try to get up to speed, or we can somehow catalog it, so if they want to hear about the environment or housing, they know they can go to a specific date.
Other comments at this point? Darcy?
I was just wondering if we ever resolved the TIF district thing.
She's keeping us focused.
Well,
Bruce, I was gonna raise that issue. I didn't think that I was gonna start something for that length of time.
I don't know that we made any changes from what the discussion was of page 170.
Because when I was looking at 170, it seems very broad, and I don't know, I would like to make it clear that we're talking about their TIF districts, businesses, actual, employing people, profiting type of businesses, not other things that TIFs have been tried to be used for in the past.
I was going to address something on that the first time Darcy brought it up. I had passed something around, I don't know if Paul sent your copy down. It's a little bit dated, I believe it's probably January 1st of 2014. There's like 11 TIFs at that time, there may be new ones now. I remember looking to find some older ones that probably have gone through their full cycle that are no longer there. As you can see, Bates Street Housing is the very first one. Several over, 81 Ash Street, in Town Manor. Bates Lofts, Birch Hill Housing on the other page, backside, I guess. So I think that may be where you're alluding to, Darcy. I've been reading a book on TIFs, very dry material. I wanted to bring it tonight, but failed to do so. Talks a lot about how TIF districts are designed. How we've done it here locally appears to be project by project. In a lot of other places, for the last 4 decades, a district could be just a geographical area, not a project. So you could take the entire 8 acres at Mill 5 and call that a TIF district. to incentivize.
I mean, you could tear it down.
Well, maybe. Or you could take the entire former raceway and make it a TIF district. And I'm not sure if that's how they did that then. That's one of the ones that would have fallen off this list. It was the whole, not just a building at a time. But when it comes to TIF districts, especially the phrase TIF district, I guess it can extend to just about anything. It's not limited to private sector or profit versus nonprofit.
I don't even care profit versus nonprofit. I just mean housing, I guess, in general versus, I mean, I guess housing that is for profit and they're putting money into it. Okay, maybe, but I'm just trying to avoid a St. Laurent situation, just to be very clear about it. I mean, I don't think we should be setting aside TIFs for that. If we're saying it's for business, I think it needs to be for businesses.
Because one of the largest uses of TIFs over the last 4 decades nationwide have been for housing, and particularly low-income housing, just so that everybody knows. I sort of agree with you, Darcy, on the specific example, but just to make sure everyone understands that, that's what TIF districts are designed to do.
And for what it's worth, just remember, we didn't TIF that at the end of the day.
I know, but that was the plan initially. I'm very aware.
Don't ask me to explain this one, because I haven't figured this one out yet.
What's that?
The handout on 2014 TIF evaluations. In the coming weeks, I'll be asking the finance director for another one of these. What it is a final official statement. It's basically all it says. Dated February 23rd, 2012 in this case. Now, what it is when the city went out to bond for $9.7 million, they retired some old bonds, rolled them into this one. They were bonding the projects that were approved that year, or probably the previous year. Since it's February of 2012, it's probably those that were approved in the previous June in 2011. But what I found very interesting in this book is some of the information that it provides that you won't find in the comprehensive annual financial report, more narratives. There's a whole section in this particular one on page 42 that talks about TIF increment financing and all of the projects, including Bruce's favorite, Central Maine Power Company. There's a section on page 32, economic development, talks about Centreville downtown, Bates Mill redevelopment, community concepts, Bates Mill dermatology, some of the businesses that are in there. What I'm sure that they're trying to do here under economic development is to, for the prospective buyers of our bonds, to understand all those positive things. So here's a document that's touting our positives. I even noticed a particular project that was listed under the required statistical information in the comprehensive annual report that didn't find its way into the narrative. And I suspect that that's because that particular TIF was not a success story. I can discuss more about that after the meeting.
What's the name of this book?
I'm not sure it really has a name. This one is entitled Standard & Poor's Rating Services, AA- C rating, final official statement dated February 23rd, 2012. It's basically, well, maybe this would be a good title, General Obligation Public Improvement and Refunding Bonds. That's what this is. So you probably find one of these a year on average. Might be 2 depending on the year. Maybe 1 year you won't find any depending on how they fall.
General publication, is that what it says?
General obligation.
Obligation.
Yeah. Basically, when the city goes out to bond, which they do once or twice a year. That's what creates the debt numbers that we were looking at
Who provided
earlier.
that for you?
I got this from the finance director a few years ago.
This would basically be like a prospectus for these municipal bonds, right?
Absolutely, correct.
Is that public information? Oh, that's public.
It's public. And I'm sure that the finance director has more than one copy. At the time, I think it was already dated. That's how I got the copy. So I'm gonna ask for an updated one because I'm interested in those narratives. It's very interesting. You don't find that anywhere else.
Kristen, is that stuff that the finance director makes available to the council?
I didn't see it. What's on your
And everyone spends days devouring what it says, and it's an in-depth study, yep. In your spare time, right? Okay. Anything else, Mike? That's it for now? So, the discussion about the TIF district, do we want to try to tone that one way or another, or where were we trying to, how are we trying to clarify that as far as this implementation plan is concerned?
I know the objective, but I'm trying to think of how we get there, how to word it.
I mean, I think you have to be a little bit careful when you talk about downtown businesses, because there are cases where landlords are actually fairly, those are businesses. And housing is a business for some people. It's a sole business for many folks, and
Trust me, I
I know,
obviously,
so it's
but
kind of a, you gotta watch how you word that, to you don't eliminate the wrong people and alienate the right people. I mean, I know it's a little bit of it definitely is,
so how about saying it's not for nonprofits, it's for businesses?
That's interesting.
well, I think we've set the precedent of like the CCI nonprofit on the old St. Dom's facility. I'm not sure that that's,
Just because we've done it in the past, though. If we're talking about starting this new thing where we're doing TIFs, it's in policies and programs and development. I mean, what types of policies and programs are we pushing for with this plan? I mean, this issue has come up multiple times.
yeah. Yeah, Kristen?
What was the page in the?
170.
170?
And I just think it's kind of broad in that section. It says, set up a tax increment financing district for the downtown. It talks about the way it has been used and mentions suburban development projects. But then I can't get a clear answer as to what we're using them for. It talks about like signage and parking and different improvements like that, but it's trying to connect that to the sentence on the page that we're looking at now. What exactly are they looking to do TIFs for? It says to support local businesses on 171. To me, Volunteers of America is not a business. It's distinct from that intentionally. There's a distinction there.
Yeah.
But would you include, like, when you go in this part right here, implementation, they charge LA Arts, LAEGC, and different organizations like that with certain things. Would that exclude them from?
Anticipation.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want?
Can you clarify it just a little bit, though?
LAEGC, LA Arts, let's say they wanted to put cultural flags on the Franco and then all these different things that would cost money.
That wouldn't require a TIF, would it?
Well, it's under signage and things like that. I'm just,
Oh,
I'm
I
not
see.
saying it
Based
would,
on-
I'm just trying to be careful, we don't, I know what you're saying, not paint with a broad brush. So we gotta be careful how we say it.
But I'm trying to figure out how that would need a
Yeah, I know.
TIF, though.
Well,
Well,
It could be,
depends.
if it's a
Signage.
downtown development
enhancement.
district TIF, you could use funding from the TIF, maybe
Right.
to do
To do
some
something
type of
like that.
wayfinding signs throughout the
Right.
community for different culture.
Like
Because
an
the idea
arts
with that,
district.
I think what they're trying to get at is whatever funding that is gonna be dedicated for that district, it can be used for a variety of different infrastructure improvements, wayfinding signs, you name it, but those funds are gonna go towards a specific area, so you can make improvements there.
Which funds, though? I mean, when you're using a TIF, that's less money you're receiving.
Who would,
When you're granting somebody a TIF and they're paying less on their taxes, that's less money they're receiving.
But we're gonna take that money and we're gonna put it specifically to an area.
District.
Right now, like you get
District.
it, right, exactly, so
District.
so the Hampton Inn has a TIF. That's just, it goes in the general fund or whatever. They're getting back whatever money that whatever the agreement was, you know, they're getting a tax break or whatever. These funds would be dedicated specifically, so you would still get you would still get a break in this district, but those funds would be dedicated to this area. They're not gonna go to the general fund.
But the city isn't getting the fund. The Hampton's getting the funds by saving the money on their taxes. I'm
The
not
difference-
understanding where the.
that's a
The
development,
difference,
that's
the
a
difference of that though would stay in the district itself. City's still getting money from the Hampton Inn
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah,
That money can go anywhere it wants to. You create a development, a TIF district, those funds are gonna
they
stay
just stay in
in
that
there.
area.
district, yeah. So it's-
And then however that district's written, however that TIF is written, is how those funds potentially could be used for then at that point. Maybe it's sidewalks or roads or lighting or, I don't know, maybe it goes even to funding some type of grant program. I don't know, you know, what the parameters could be of that, but.
So I think there's two different sides of this. I'm talking about to whom the TIFs should be granted as far as tax breaks, and then there's the other side of how that money should be spent.
Right.
And I think what I'm suggesting is that the TIFs shouldn't be granted for subsidized housing specifically, but the funds could be used for other nonprofit things, like signage and whatever else is listed on 170.
Michael?
So, I'm hearing two different things here. If you created a TIF district or TIF project, Hampton is not a district?
No.
Correct,
I don't want to side, the answer is no?
correct.
Okay. If somebody came in and wanted to put up a theater, $10 million theater, somewhere on Lisbon Street, and wanted a TIF to do that, it's a nonprofit, let's call it a nonprofit versus a profit-based business. We'd probably want to encourage that, because that would bring people to Lewiston, spend money, they'd probably have a return on investment. The lofts,
The issue is though, you've got to be able to capture tax value if you're gonna do an individual business. So even if they were nonprofit, the only way you could do that is they would have to consent to paying a tax.
right,
Because it's the difference between what you had for
That's
value
true.
on a piece of land versus what you will have.
I was gonna say
So
that.
the only way it really works for a nonprofit is that they've gotta step to the plate from a tax standpoint.
Right.
A district is a different animal. I mean, as I understand it, you could potentially make rehab money available.
well, in many of those cases, you could have two entities, one that owns the property and leases it to the nonprofit. And TIFs are traditionally traditionally to be able to lock those funds for specific uses. That's where TIFs originated. But I was just going to mention the Bates Lofts is a private endeavor. It's not, it does have some subsidized housing in it, but it's not a Lewiston Housing Authority item. It's not a
No, it's free
pure.
market, it's free market.
It is, there's a combination. The owner is free market, even though he may accept some Section 8 and other mechanisms.
Which is totally different from what VOA was doing, what Lewiston Housing does all over.
Well,
Yeah, because it's basically a government-owned entity. And I would agree that if it's a
they
government-owned
were
entity,
prepared
then
to
it
pay
should not.
taxes. They were prepared to pay taxes. VOA was prepared to pay taxes on that.
Were they?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only way you could do a TIF.
Right.
That's right.
That's where you walk the line, like on the folks, the Veterans Administration that, or not the VA, but the folks that did St. Joe's. That's a nonprofit,
Yeah.
and yet that's a very worthwhile project. They didn't ask for a TIF, right?
Which one?
St. Joe's, Veterans Inc.
Oh, no, they don't have a TIF.
They didn't have a TIF, but that, if a project like that presented itself within a downtown district, that, I'd have a hard time saying that that wasn't appropriate. I think it is serving a very needy population that deserves to be, assisted.
Because I guess where I would have heartburn, I know the technical differences create a lot of gray area, but like the VOA or the first round on the St. Laurent project, I mean, when you take a look at what the TIF numbers were, what the revenue to the city was going to be, there is no way, with any common sense, was Lewiston going to see a return on investment. That was going to be a money-draining, poor cash flow on the city of Lewiston. And it probably still is, regardless of the differences in the first version versus the second version. That's where the concern comes in. I mean, if it's a project that will either succeed or fail on its own and have little impact on the city of Lewiston as far as what it has to create for outlays as a condition of that enterprise. Obviously, housing has a lot of conditions of its enterprise. If you're bringing in an element that requires more and more city services, whether that be education, GA, or anything else, I think that's where the rub begins on projects such as that. That can also occur, I mean, Walmart, hopefully it's paying for itself. Currently assessed back in late 2013, $59 million, captured assessed valuation 57, original assessed valuation 1.3 million. There's more numbers, more calculations that I'm not understanding here. The only one I deal with in my business is a simple 50% capture, and we get 50% of whatever we pay in real estate taxes back. Pretty straightforward. But the concerning item is, whenever doing a project, no matter how small or how big, profit or non-profit, whether it's a housing item or like a Walmart distribution center, what we're expected to invest, are we really going to see the return on investment? We had to invest a whole lot of dollars in Alfred Port Parkway, the infrastructure on River Road that comes up to, and then divots back out of the city towards Cotton Road. I'm not sure that that's really thought out very well. If it was, we'd be seeing our debt holdings decreasing with every project. But when we see our debt as a total increase, when we see that as per capita increase, because if we're not creating the opportunities for employment here in this community, but we're bringing in so-called assets, equity, the valuation that we see in our $2.157 billion, but we see the per capita debt increasing. Even when our population was adjusted in the census, the number went in the wrong direction. And that's probably because the mean income, or median income in Lewiston was going in the wrong direction for that per capita debt to be continuing to increase, doubling over 10 years period of time. So, playing with TIFs is a very tricky item, and I think we don't spend a whole lot of time when we're being pitched these ideas.
And you're not, because you don't have any say in TIFs. That's why it goes to the council. You folks don't find out about them. It goes to support a project. You guys review the project when the council's reviewing.
Well, when we're asked for acquisitions and dispositions, we might hear about whether there's a TIF involved.
You might, yeah, that could be an opportunity like that.
And it would probably play in making a decision on whether we should acquire or dispose.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't know if a TIF will be involved at the time we're asked for a recommendation, because the TIF is driven by a project typically, unless we were to create a district or something.
But when it comes right down to it, if you're trying to plan, and I've used this example in the past, like a SimCity computer model, want to do what's going to expand Lewiston in every way, culturally, fiscally, whatever other areas there are,
Social.
socially. I mean, you can't, go doing things willy-nilly that, this makes sense, it makes me feel good, and it makes me all warm and fuzzy inside. But, in 10 years, you're looking at a Detroit situation, or something on a smaller scale, where you've got blight, you've got higher crime as a result, not necessarily as a direct result, but indirect. There are indirect consequences to everything.
Can I make a suggestion, Bruce?
Yes, Dave.
So maybe, I'm not sure if this fully addresses Darcy's concern, but the title of that section could even be changed to set up a tax increment financing district for downtown enhancements. And then maybe the tool there instead is establish a TIF district in the downtown to provide enhancements. I mean, I'm taking language right out of that paragraph there. Provide enhancements that would improve the climate for residents, businesses, and shopping experience, something to that effect. It doesn't necessarily say what the TIFs are going to be for, but the idea is that the TIF would, the result of the TIF is to make enhancements to the downtown area. So it doesn't necessarily, I guess, say who the TIF can be allowed for, because we're gonna pick, it's a district, and you're gonna be in that area, and the uses are up for discussion, I guess. But what this is talking about is how to use the funding from that TIF to make the enhancements in that area. This isn't really talking about who to give the TIFs to, it's saying what we should do with those TIFs.
Does that sort of answer the question, Darcy, or?
Not really, I appreciate it, but I think part of the problem is that the Community and Economic Development Office sees projects such as those that were presented as enhancements, but it's not a big deal.
So do we want to change the wording?
I would like to, but I don't know how to word it at this point.
Question. When you say downtown, you see it both under whatever the two columns are called, policies and programs and the fix. Downtown, what's the geography of downtown? And is it limited to downtown as it's being stated here?
Yeah, I don't know that we've defined an actual boundary, Mike, as to what the downtown is. You know, is that Lisbon Street? Is that the residential neighborhoods? You know, I would suggest that it's probably the residential neighborhoods as well, but,
Because we've been hearing a little bit of discussion in the public arena about what is downtown lately, but I don't think it's defined anywhere. It's just suggested that downtown means Lisbon Street. And I forget the other term that was used for what's not Lisbon Street.
Inner city.
Inner city, okay. So if,
There's a lot of disagreement about.
so if there is a difference in the lexicon of downtown and inner city, then I don't see where there'd be too much problem with this language. Now, if there is no distinction between downtown and inner city, that it's all one and it's downtown, then there may be a bit of a concern. What I just heard Dave say, he was adding some language to the fix. Something about shopping was in that sentence. I was trying to follow and remember everything that was said when I heard the new words, and that's hard to do. But if the fix is described as enhancing shopping experience, or however you said it, that may limit the uses for the TIFs. It's not suggesting that it could then be used for housing, although traditionally it has been used for housing.
And then that's the hard part. There are certain examples that it would be good to use those for housing.
yeah, I mean, I guess the argument's gonna be if somebody suggests that low-income housing is an enhancement versus streetscape improvements or wayfinding or sidewalks or something, I mean, I guess that would be the debate that would be had at that time. Same with downtown. I can absolutely see the city, if downtown is thought of as being Lisbon Street, and all of a sudden somebody wanted to do a development, a TIF district in the riverfront, you know. If it's a good idea, why not? I mean, and I don't know if it's a good idea, but why not, you know?
I mean, aren't we hoping, and part of the goal of this whole comprehensive plan is to expand on the downtown and increase its vitality, and that would include the Mill and Riverfront District?
I would, that's.
I would sort
I
of
would say
hope that that was the
absolutely.
goal, but
And I would
That's
say that would,
not, that's not the downtown residential, that's not downtown residential.
well,
Could we put downtown in parentheses until we figure it out?
well, and I would suggest,
We've been making, could we even replace the word downtown with the mill district? Centreville, it's districts, right? What, Centreville, Mill, Riverfront,
Riverfront District, zoning districts.
yeah, using the zoning districts as the lexicon here.
I would be fine with it.
But you would do that anyway.
Naturally, that's just kind of what I think of.
and I'll,
Like a TIF, if I'm thinking about
Yeah.
a TIF district, if we ever do
Right.
create it, that's kind of where I think top of Kennedy Park down almost, or something like that. I mean, that's just my own opinion, but in terms of being able to use this and that money being able to grow what we've started, I think that's, just naturally, for me, that's the kind of area that I see.
I agree.
And I think that, again, you walk a fine line, because when you talk about, you know, not allowing TIFs to be utilized necessarily by nonprofits, is that blocking both of the medical centers from expanding into and enhancing those areas?
Good, I hope so.
They don't need a TIF.
They've done it enough.
Yeah, I see.
And Bates,
Yeah, I mean,
too.
I'm not that worried, I mean, we got
You know.
ordinances and all that stuff.
Yeah, I
Everything's
mean,
gonna
I
have
think
to
that
come-
it all has to come here,
So-
that's right. I'm just saying that
I understand.
the TIF districts I mean, they can be, it can have an unintended consequence, to say the least. Because, I mean, if somebody came and said, we want to make Mill 5 a TIF district, and we're going to develop it, and oh, by the way, the major tenant is Central Maine Medical Center and the YMCA, both of which are nonprofits, does that automatically rule it out and kill it?
You don't want me to get into this debate on whether or not CMMC is a nonprofit, so let's just move along. It's not going to go anywhere. So honestly, I don't think we're going to come to
Yeah,
a
I'm
solution.
just
It's
saying that
too
when
like
you-
complex.
You know, that we have to be careful how we word it, that's all.
And it's fine. It's going to be hard to word it so that it references that thing, so we should just.
Okay, yeah, I'm just, I don't want to not address it if you're, if you're passionate about it, but.
Well, I'm absolutely passionate about it. I just don't think that there's a way that we can word it appropriately for it to be effective.
So let it stand?
Do we have consensus on the zoning districts?
I like that.
So the
I like that.
enhancement of that is, Dave, to define Saunterville, Mill and Riverfront, and, is that it? That's the, that was three. The Saunterville, Mill, and Riverfront districts as the location for that, or that's the enhancement that, Gil?
Maybe a way to get at what Darcy is leading toward. We have a TIF policy now for the city. And maybe what we should be doing is revisiting that TIF policy. You know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I mean, now we have a policy that, I think it gives a dollar amount. You know, it's gotta be a certain dollar amount before the numbers even work. I mean, doing a TIF on a restaurant may not make sense because of the failure rate. Some people question doing doing TIFs for retail, you know. So maybe it's more a matter of taking a comprehensive look at the TIF policy, and if we think we've got heartburn with affordable housing or housing in certain areas or whatever, maybe that's where we revisit it. I mean, just given the VOA project and the St. Laurent project anyway, I think that's a conversation Ed wants to have. I mean, we really kind of need to know as a community whether we're going to be willing to fund an affordable housing project down the road. I mean, that's a fundamental that we need to resolve as a community, because if we're not, that's fine. We just need to know that, so we're not wasting people's time. If we're gonna do it, we need to know that too. So maybe the approach is to, take a good look at that TIF policy. There's also gonna be a housing policy too, I think, which is spoken to here, and maybe that's another avenue to sort of look at it. So, I mean, it doesn't really speak to this per se, but something to think about.
Just for a little bit of perspective, parts and tires and service business in Gorham has a TIF. I don't believe there's an actual district. It's rather rural, tree lines all the way around it, last time I visited. Not all that much money involved as far as the original assessed valuation or the captured valuation or anything like that. I think, and everything that I've been reading on the origination of TIFs is to enhance a certain portion of your urban area, because urban areas were declining in the 70s, and that's when TIFs were formulated, and throughout the 80s and 90s. I don't think there's anything wrong with picking the specific zones, because the zones for Lewiston seem to fit perfectly. That's the area we want to concentrate on. Should we be providing more TIFs out towards the Raceway or Gendron Business Park? Probably not. Do we really want to be providing TIFs for housing projects, regardless of whether it's in the inner city or out in the DR or NCR areas? Probably not. That's why I do think we should revisit the policy. It'd be nice to know what's in there, because I don't know what's in there.
But there again, I mean, somebody could come along for exit 80, and it's like, we're gonna have
But that-
$60,000-$70,000 a year jobs.
But that's
and-
not
and
the
they need a-
purpose of
They need a
TIFs.
piece of it subsidized.
If a
on the front
business is coming in here and providing $70,000 or $80,000 a year jobs, I don't think they need a TIF to locate here.
Yeah, you never
No,
know.
but they may want it, though. They just-
Yeah, of course they'll want it. No, who wouldn't want it? No, anytime you can move into an area and get your taxes lowered just because it's being offered, you want it. I mean, we never had a practice in with my employer, and it's the only TIF that exists. It's available, so you go and shoot for it. If it wasn't available, would it have prevented the project? Probably not. I said, none. But the TIFs were designed to try to revitalize a depressed urban area. That's what these three districts represent. Centreville is basically Lisbon Street, extends over to CMMC. Mill, obviously that's where our mills are. Riverfront, similar area. It won't prohibit housing projects, because I could see a major project going right into Little Canada. That falls within one of these three zones, either Mill or Riverfront, I forget which.
It's, there's a couple of zones there. You got Mill, you got Riverfront.
So,
Sandy, you had something? You're all set, but Kevin?
Well, I was just gonna say, we've had some smaller projects come to us, and then they move out to the outskirts of town, and not necessarily asking for a TIF or whatever, they're doing it because they can build whatever they want, and their parking is a little easier for them. Creating a district that's downtown, giving them the ability to have a TIF might encourage some of these people to move closer into the down. It may or may not, but I think
we
it's
could have a Dollar Tree downtown
they
instead.
didn't need it way out there, the land was probably pretty cheap for them to get and build on. And if we create a district or an area, they might be more encouraged or inclined to move closer to urban.
Actually, you mentioned that, Mike, though. I would think a Dollar Tree or something like that on Bartlett Street would make huge.
It would.
A miniature Walmart.
God, you
One
can
of those
walk
little
to it,
minis.
prices are reasonable.
Making those, yeah.
We talked
Yeah,
about that.
10,000 square foot mini Walmart.
We were playing with Phyllis's lot when Family Dollar was coming in, and they got enough land on Phyllis's lot to put a Family Dollar there. That place would be a gold mine.
Make it architecturally compatible.
I'm on Sabata Street, and I drive on Sabata Street on a daily basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. It's amazing that you only see 2 cars at Family Dollar. Now, granted, around Christmas, it was a little different, but most days, and Dollar Tree, not Dollar Tree, what's the other one?
Dollar General.
Dollar General, 2, 3 cars.
But the
I
guy,
went by
the
there
guy
this
did
afternoon,
tell
it
us,
was
the
3
guy did
cars.
tell us that the average time of somebody spending in the stores was 8 minutes.
Yeah. it's-
So at
It's never the same 2 cars.
8 minute increments, you can still run a lot of cars through there in the course of
David
the
said
day.
that 7 minutes too many.
Well, it's possible, but that's what, I remember that he said that was they timed it nationwide, and the average stay for somebody in from the front door to back out was 8 minutes, and that included the time at the cash register.
Probably included people who didn't buy anything,
It might,
because I've done that. I've walked in, just, walk back out.
yeah. It probably only took 4 minutes, so somebody else was there 12, so who knows, but anyway, it is amazing, it is amazing, so. All right, so, do we need to do anything further to these first 2 or 3 pages of the implementation?
So I'm still, to be clear here, am I adding language to the tool that says establish a district in those specific districts? Is that what I'm doing here?
That's what we're doing, yes, that's what we're doing, yeah, that's a head nod, Dave, yes, that's what we're doing.
We on page 2 again?
No, we're on page 4. We're on page 4.
Lightning speed.
Boom, we're at lightning speed, we've done only half an hour for that one page.
Yeah, we've already done it. Yeah.
Still on page 4?
Now we're on page 4. Still, I'm not sure that we should start a board and seal club, but, you know.
What the heck is that?
Board and seal club is if a property becomes abandoned, that somebody actually, it's like a club to go and board it up and seal it up and protect it, which, maybe in Detroit it worked, I'm not sure that I'm not really. I think
I
the
can't-
city takes that responsibility on, if you condemn one, that's how it gets the plywood and the red X, right?
We can't necessarily go onto the property without going through significant legal machinations to do that sort of thing. So to encourage a group of volunteers to go onto property, not coming from the city. I mean, if I lived in a neighborhood and I had a vacant lot next to me or an abandoned home and, I was concerned about it, I'd probably cut the grass. Now, some people do that, some people don't do it. But there are a few things on this page that don't make much sense to me. The implement vacancy licensing,
Yeah.
if you take a look at page 174, they're basically saying if your property is vacant for 2 years, we can make you sell it, tear it down.
Implement vacancy licensing.
That's contrary to law, and that doesn't make a lot of sense in my estimation.
Is that Peter
Also, when
Boulevard?
you're dealing with, the big problem properties that we're dealing with, you're gonna get laughed at. The bank isn't gonna necessarily license these things, and the owner has walked away. So I wonder how legal, this is, because, it says on page 174, they risk forfeiting their property at 80% of the value. And then after 2 years, they've got to either somehow magically get it occupied, they gotta sell it, or they gotta demolish it.
And the example is Cincinnati. I haven't brought this up yet, but as we've been going through this, some of the references to cities that are much, much larger than us. I don't know why the consultants did that to us. I mean, it bothered me all the way through. This is my first opportunity to make reference to it. It might work in Cincinnati just simply because of the size and the number of large tenement structures. Maybe even another word than tenement, because when we think of tenement structures here, we think of 3 to 5 deckers. Over there, they're probably talking about 27-story brick buildings, where you see broken out windows, you know, from the ground floor to the 27th floor.
So are you suggesting, Gil, that we strike implement vacancy licensing
That's my
completely?
feeling.
That would be your plan?
I agree.
Is that a thumbs up on that one? Okay, that's a good one, let's go.
The next one, hold landowners accountable. When we purchased the software we purchased, we were sold a bill of goods, and you were gonna be able to be at home, go online, key up a property, and see if we have any activity on it. You're gonna look at permits, you're gonna look at code enforcement issues, you're gonna be able to pull up all that information, licensing information. That's not available, and that would be nice to have available. That's a nice tool. But when you're talking about vacancy and building conditions, you know, creating this database, I don't think we'd ever do that necessarily. I mean, vacancy can change day to day. And building condition, that can change day to day. You know, what does that really mean? I mean, that could be more than a full-time job just to try to maintain that type of a database. So you know, having our records available to the public would be great, but taking it to that next level, I'm not so sure that that's reasonable.
I have a question.
Yes.
We are going forward with an assessor's card, right?
Yes, the assessor's information should be available, Michael, at, I think, by August maybe, where you're gonna be able to take a look at your property card in total. So you're gonna be able to look at it to see if your assessment makes sense. You can look at your neighbors. You know, that'll be a really powerful tool. Because right now, you essentially have to call the assessor's department, you have to go to the assessor's department.
So
We
it'll
have to
be
do
a
the same
little
thing.
easier to use than what's currently available if you want to find out who owns a particular property on the other side of town.
Yeah, you'll be able to do all that.
You can pretty much do that now with the
Building
GIS.
value, how many bedrooms, how many apartments, condition.
Because I've seen property cards in other municipalities across Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and they're very useful.
Yeah, I think it's gonna save the assessors a lot of time, because now real estate professionals have to come into the office to take a look at the cards. So, I mean, that information is gonna be out there.
So are you saying strike that section as well? And then I assume you're gonna drop down one more and say strike that one is also unenforceable?
Well, I think, I mean, it's certainly a noble piece to have property information available online, including permits and the gamut. Basically, the stuff you can see when you come into my office. But if we're expected to start rating buildings, like Darcy's is an A, and Paul's is a B, and yours is a C, that changes. And then if we're gonna try to deal with vacancies, you got an 8-unit building, is it occupied, is it vacant? I mean, I just don't know how much value that has, and I think it's an unrealistic expectation giving staffing.
I think that building conditions might be a little bit easier because maybe by that we could mean like code violations or things like that, unresolved issues. But vacancies, I agree, it's gonna be way too hard to keep track of. I have no problem with the building conditions part, I mean, except for I don't know how, you know, if we have the staff to do that, it sounds like we don't, but for building conditions, I think we could go by code violations.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest too.
Yeah, I mean, and that would, and then you'd have to decide how often it was updated. I mean, that's the thing, I guess is.
Jason, that our database already does that?
No, you can't go online at home and look at things like that. You can't look at permits.
But when we bought the database, they said you could.
What's that?
When we bought the database, they said you would be able to.
Yes. They said a lot of things.
Was that Munis thing?
Energo.
Oh, Intergo?
$500,000 purchase.
Yeah, Darcy.
Does a lot of things, but it only does a few of them well.
You had something?
Just a couple of quick things / question. I'm noticing, does it seem like the lines aren't lining up between these two pages? Like I'm trying to match who's responsible. with some of these.
Shift your paper.
You gotta
Oh.
be really careful, yeah. It's-
Yeah, they line up, pretty much.
Because it looks like hire additional economic development staff to help roll out and manage similar programs. Seems that's been left up to the housing association and landlords to hire additional economic development staff. 4 to 5. It's near the bottom.
Under programs.
Maybe they're referring to Lewiston housing? Well,
And you think it lines up with, oh,
And I don't know that we have a housing association.
Lewiston, you don't have a Lewiston Housing?
That's Lewiston Housing Authority. That's a government.
No, I know that, no, Lewiston Housing Association, there's no Lewiston,
Not that I know of. There's landlord associations, but not like a community-wide one that
The
I'm aware of.
Neighborhood Housing League, that I think they consider themselves to be.
I don't know. I just don't think that's practical.
yeah, I'm sorry, Darcy, which one are you looking at again?
It says hire additional economic development staff. It's under implement dollar home program.
Implement, okay, yep.
Then it says hire additional staff, and then if you go all the way over, it says the party responsible is housing association and landowners.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
City
city
council.
council, and then other is homeowner association.
All right.
I think the other, well, one of the things Gil pointed out is I need to clean up, or they need to clean up the top here, because a lot of these columns, they're not consistent on other pages where they reference planning and code and then planning. It should be the same, and it's not on a couple of pages. But with that in mind, I mean, I guess other is the groups that they see that might want to be involved in that.
So when they say that, they're saying that the landowners are more the help roll out and manage similar programs?
I think that they're gonna be involved in it. I don't know that they would be involved in the hiring of it, but they would be involved with the implementation of the dollar home program itself. Should be covered into this.
And then the other thing I had was near the top of the page where it says promote construction of mixed income affordable housing. It says create an affordable housing policy that requires new developments over a certain size to offer units at or below market rate. But I think that contradicts another section where we had said to do the opposite.
Nope, that's a good example. So what's happening, and you don't know this, but where you folks have changed the recommendations and whatnot, I have to change the implementation matrix. So that's a great example where you folks talked about limiting it to market rate. It wasn't affordable units in there, and take that out of that. So there's gonna be changes in this matrix here reflective of the comments that you folks have already made in the previous section. So that's a great example, Darcy. You folks have absolutely made a different recommendation there. So one of the things I've started to do is go back and go through the implementation schedule, go back to those pages and figure out if we actually make a change there or not.
Mike?
So to recap enforcement, we removed the third item, well, the third block, implement vacancy licensing, and we're only removing the word vacancy and the fix on the next line, hold landowners accountable. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
I'd be fine with that.
Do we want to specify building condition means code violations? Or does it matter? I just think that building condition might be kind of broad and it might set up code enforcement or
Once we-
whomever to go
Once we
around.
can make those records available online, that'll be great.
Yeah, it's a building condition.
I'm just saying if we specify it's code enforcement issues or violations, that might make it more specific so that code or whomever isn't expected to go around and evaluate subjectively building
That's
conditions.
something we certainly want to do, can do.
Yeah, I think you're right. The word subjective is very critical in that because, you know, what one person thinks is maybe a Class B or a Class C building may not really be the case just because it's old.
Well, and building condition in general would, I think, lead to a lot higher of a workload than specifically code enforcement
Sure.
violations.
You could have a building that had just been sided and re-roofed that the heating system doesn't work in, or you could have one that needs some extra attention but has a brand-new heating, a very efficient system. This will be a lot more livable than, yeah, you're right, it's a real subjective because there's so many different pieces of it.
So, are we doing something with that one?
Strike vacancy.
Yeah, we're gonna strike vacancy.
And then change the building
Code violation.
violation.
Under hold tenants accountable, I don't see planning and code creating an education program. I mean, we deal with tenants every day in a one-on-one situation, and we really do try to educate them when we're in front of them as to what they can and can't do, what they should do, you know? I mean, there are still tenants out there that think they don't have to pay their rent if there's one violation in their building. I think if there were gonna be any education, that would be more Pine Tree Legal, Maine People's Alliance, Neighborhood Housing League. I mean, those are the folks that should be out there talking to the tenants, trying to get the tenants to step to the plate. Because I was the one that asked the consultant way back when to have a provision to hold tenants accountable, because there was a provision for holding landlords accountable, but there was nothing in there to hold tenants accountable. Tenants are probably the single largest group that can affect the most change overnight. Just pick your trash up, pay your rent, pick up after your dogs, don't damage buildings, plant a few flowers around your property, keep your house clean, keep your hallways clean. I mean, that even speaks to lead poisoning as well. So that's sort of what I wanted to see when I asked for a tenant accountability, because there seems to be a mindset in the downtown that everybody's responsible and everybody's on the line other than the tenants. And you hear that time, and we heard it here just a few meetings ago from an agent of the Neighborhood Housing League, where it was discriminatory for landlords to do background checks. I mean, that, as a screening measure, I mean, that's sort of where some people are in the downtown. Everybody needs to step to the plate. If we all step to the plate, we can have a great place.
And
You
Gil's
don't have
right.
to be rich, you don't have to be a rocket scientist.
When we did the consolidated plan for the community development block grant, and part of it was housing, it was a very contentious meeting with probably a representative of the same agency, probably the same person, who basically said it was the city's job to maintain the code enforcement stuff, which part of it is.
Sure.
But basically that the landlords were responsible for everything and the tenants were the victims. And it's very, very hard to get, even trying to have that conversation with someone who's supposed to be an educator and helping tenants through sometimes a very difficult process. But I don't see it the city's responsibility to try to teach these people. I don't know what
I mean,
department would it be.
I see that as a no-win situation for code. I mean, that's a huge effort.
Mike?
I don't see any problem with the language in the fix. I don't think it directs planning and code. Doesn't say planning and code. Okay.
Responsible
So
for
they
it.
have
I was-
to strike it there.
Yeah, if we,
Responsible party.
on page
under-
5, you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, if we struck it there, and I don't know which other category they might fall under, maybe other, a tenant education program. I thought that's what Home Ec was for. No, I know that doesn't have as much a purpose in our educational system today as it once did, but if it did, maybe we wouldn't have some of the problems that exists out there. How to take care of your homes, how to treat your living environment properly, so on and so forth. But whether it's Department of Education, or whether it's a Neighborhood Housing League, I don't know what the exact charge of the Lewiston Housing Authority is, but there should be an entity out there that could provide some educational programs, because I think those educational programs would be invaluable.
It's needed.
Yeah, it's definitely needed. So if it simply means changing who the responsible party is,
Yep, that's my
I
advice.
think the language could still stay there as far as the fix is concerned.
Is that, do you have a consensus on that?
Yeah.
I would say the same as the next one, the tenant database.
It's the same thing with the tenant database. I don't really know what that means.
Kristen, you had a,
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say, just getting back to Darcy's point, you know, it says housing association in a couple places here, and nobody knows what that is, we should probably either figure out what that is or find somebody else who's gonna be responsible.
Yeah.
And the other point I wanted to make about what we were just talking about, the, tenant education, is, it says local housing agencies, but I would actually, I think, include some of the organizations that Gil named, but also Healthy Androscoggin.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great.
That's a tough nut to crack,
Healthy Androscoggin?
No.
educating people.
Yeah,
It all-
Yeah, but we gotta
it all
try.
talks about-
Incentive
It's
program.
difficult changing attitudes. I think that's what the issue is, changing attitudes.
And I noticed it says, community organizations, maybe that's the language we want to use on that, so we don't want to name specific agencies, I know we know that.
Right, no, that's what I was thinking.
And then under that same bullet, if you will, I'm not sure what the tenant database is all about.
I know what it's about, I just don't see how the, who is it, local housing agencies or planning and code enforcement are gonna come up with it, but
I'd love, that's a pipe dream, I'd love to see that happen.
we have one, we have a very, we have one, it's not very good, but we have one. I would love for the city to do it, but I don't know how planning and code enforcement, I mean, unless we hire somebody to keep track of all the evictions that happen, like at the
There's an
Lewiston
agency
District
that does that,
Courthouse.
Handles evictions. There's a state agency that does that, handles evictions.
Handles evictions?
Yeah, well, it handles the recording of evictions. They follow court. I use it in Augusta all the time. It's, I think it's out of Portland, but what they do is they track specific, all evictions. And they list them. It's proprietary. I pay $25 a year. And when I want to know if that tenant has a history of evictions, I check with them. It's not always accurate. I mean, sometimes they lag behind a little bit, but I find that it's helpful, but
And this is through the state, not a private.
no, I'm sorry, it's a private, it's not a state. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I misspoke.
that's my point, is that we have something similar for Androscoggin County, but I don't see how it would be feasible for I wish we had a system like that or a better system, but I don't see how the city would make that happen unless they hired somebody to specifically keep
No, I
track
don't-
of all of the evictions.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it would take the private sector to do that.
So who has that list for Androscoggin County? Can we put that name in there, or is it just the tenants group?
It is not a tenants group, it's a,
Landlord group is what I meant.
Just got together and.
yes, it's a private person who sells it and you can purchase the list.
Right.
It's more of a database / list where you can like,
You'd think the
Kinda
landlord
helps each other
association
out.
would think
Well,
that.
that's what I was wondering, if we could put them in here,
That would change, so.
so do we wanna make a notation that there is somebody else that's responsible for that, or? Cause the local housing agencies, I mean,
but what was the word that she used?
community organizations, is that the word, Kristen, community organizations?
Yeah, that's why they have it on, page 7.
so that's instead of local housing agencies and housing association?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Pauline, I'm sorry.
On other programs, under setting up a land bank and considering setting up a development district and plan, I can understand the city departments, but what would Lewiston Housing Authority have with setting up a land bank and development districts? I mean,
I think I agree, yeah.
pardon?
I agree with you. I don't see where they have a role necessarily.
They wouldn't be the responsible party for either of those, would they?
Donate some land, maybe?
For a housing project.
Plenty of land over by Hillview.
I was reading, setting up the land bank, and I'm thinking, don't we already have a land bank? Maybe it's unofficial. That's the only difference. We've been land banking for years.
We just don't advertise our assets.
Yeah, we don't advertise the assets of the properties, and, I mean, that's what we're being asked to do here last week, and we'll be revisiting at some point. And I'm not in favor of land banking, as other members have identified as well. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with it even being in the comp plan, or at least so open-ended as to have very little verbiage associated to it.
Well, I mean, the verbiage would come upon developing an actual policy, is, I guess, maybe to some members' concerns, we don't have a policy. So and that's been a question that's been raised both by counselors and finance committee members, is why are we doing this? And we have to make an argument every time. So maybe if there was actually a land bank program developed, there would be some policy, rules, maybe a board that's involved with this or something to that effect. So we wouldn't have to have this discussion every single time.
Oh, you had something?
Well, the sense I have of all of this is that this was developed for some other state, some other city, and they just slapped it in here. This is not something that comes from any think tank or Planapalooza or anything like that. This is kind of like a foreign object that fell out of the sky and landed in the book. You know, a lot of this stuff is just Greek, you know. It just doesn't, a lot of it just doesn't make sense. So we have the task of going through this thing and picking out what makes sense, or at least picking out what doesn't make sense, and leaving what appears to have some kind of sanity, you know? I don't know. Where does this come from?
Yeah, I don't know, I think the consultants probably looked at some pretty large cities. I mean, you mentioned Detroit earlier. I read something, I think, recently where there's a land bank in Detroit. They control 25 or 30% of the properties in Detroit.
Given the fact the whole place turned into a trash heap, literally not overnight, but economically, someone had to pick up pieces, so they set up land.
I mean, that's sort of, you know, when you drop down to the Dollar Home Program, it's the same thing. I mean, we don't own houses. Once in a great while, we'll come into ownership of a house, but rare, you know, a multi-year house. I think we have one right now, maybe two.
Paul makes a good point. I didn't even, my mind wasn't even tracking in that direction, but the minute, you know, you said that they probably just plopped this in from someplace else.
Yeah, there's no
It just
question in my
makes so
mind.
much sense. And I know that their contract was rather limited for the amount of time that they put in. It was supposed to be done, what was the original time schedule, 2013?
A year, yeah.
It was supposed to be, it was awarded in early 13, and the schedule went through towards the end of 13, and now we're into 15. And when they had to go back with some rewrites and so forth, they probably took some liberties just to pull from other projects that they've worked on.
It's just it's like a foreign object that fell into the book, you know, from some other galaxy somewhere, probably like Detroit. Board and Seal Club.
We'll say there are actually some folks on the downtown neighborhood action committee who are interested in actually starting a board and seal.
Oh, good, well, fine, I don't even know what it is. What is it, Board and Seal Club?
It's, you'll just like a whole explanation about it. It's folks who basically board up and seal.
Oh, that's what he was in,
Seal up
that's what he's
the
referring to?
doors.
It's on page
That compressors running,
176,
I can't hear
Paul.
a thing, it's right behind me.
It's on page 176 as a descriptor.
I saw that.
And I think there's merit to that, but I would argue that the proponent would not be the city just because of the issues. It would be more, you know, local housing agencies or neighborhood groups or whatever.
When that machine's running, I can't hear anything that you're saying. And I don't have I'm not losing my hearing.
I am.
And it's overshadowed. I mean, you'll sit here and you'll hear that compressor.
No, same thing with respect to it too.
What's that?
Same thing when this thing is on too, it's hard to hear. For me anyway.
What you're referring to?
These units,
All those units?
yeah,
You're inside the wall?
yeah.
Okay.
So would the DNAC be requesting, CDBG money?
DNA's gonna be gone at the end
Oh,
of the month.
I thought that's what, I'm sorry.
I did, Brian Mann was really behind getting together for the steel fund, so I think that there are people who are actually interested.
Okay, another group, they would,
Yeah.
okay.
Is it legal for other people to walk onto somebody else's property and do this?
I unofficially tell people, if you're concerned with this is more single-family neighborhoods, that if you're concerned with the abandoned house next to you, no one's gonna beat you up because you're cutting the grass. Or picking up some trash off the lawn. Or if there's a bunch of debris, you know, put it in the back of the house if you think it's got some value. You know, that's what I would do if I had a neighbor like that.
Nailing up 4
But I
by
can't
8
officially,
window?
I can't officially tell people to do that.
But I thought that was part of Officer Barill's job, maybe not necessarily to pound the nails, but to identify where Public Works would come in and put up the 4 by 8 sheets in the windows and so forth to seal.
Yeah, we have new ordinances with respect to that. I mean, during the crisis, we were doing a lot of that, but the city attorney came up with a new policy, and it's a bit of an onerous process.
If we're,
Whenever lawyers get involved, that's what happens.
Well, they were correct, but, you know, we were playing a little loosey-goosey there, but we had to. I mean, we were just dealing with so many issues.
I think if the city even encourages as part of the comprehensive plan, I think that the civil liability, if someone's putting up a board and the board slips, a hand goes through the window, you have opened up the city being charged. And if I had a vacant house next to me and I'm looking at Webster Street, that vacant lot with the grass that's 4 feet high, it looks terrible. If I own the house to the left of that vacant lot, I'd be mowing the lawn, be a pain, but it would make my house look
Yeah.
nicer. But I think when you start talking about tar papering the roof, boarding up windows, repairing, you know, a broken stair, I think if the city's encouraging that by
Yeah.
having it in a plan, the city better be willing, if
Yeah.
someone gets hurt doing it, to pay the piper.
That's a good point, and I'm not saying it necessarily belongs in there, but I am saying it's not like some crazy thing that they randomly put in here, and it does happen in other places.
Oh, yeah, I think it makes sense. It's just we shouldn't be the proponents, that's all.
I think we should remove that then. Is there a consensus?
Consensus on that? Anything else on these 2 pages, 4 and 5?
I'd just like to revisit the land bank and say that there should be probably a little more explanation there, and just simply to identify what is expected to come, a new policy.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that policy is to have something really planned for that property that's being land banked in the near future, and not just land banked to be sitting there for an undefined amount of time, like so many of the properties we've acquired in the past.
Yes, Kristen?
So maybe the language is not set up a land bank, but create a land bank policy.
Yeah, that's what I was
Right.
just gonna say.
Yeah,
I think that's perfect.
that would make sense.
Would the planning board have a role in setting up that policy?
I would think so. So they should be listed over there as part of it.
You could actually list the planning board as one of the responsible parties for that, Michael.
Yeah, that's what we
Do we really not have our own column in responsible parties, but the public library does?
You do in a couple of areas, probably not often enough, though.
Notice is that it's, this is heading into one of the planning department.
Yeah, that's what we were saying. That
Yeah,
is-
it's inconsistent.
11 has us.
Yeah, we need to change that, because in other sections it references the board itself.
Page 11, like Mike said, has it.
Amazing.
Page 11 has the planning board listed as a responsible party, but there's nothing checked off in that whole page.
I mean, you are the keeper of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
And you folks are gonna have your hands all over implementation moving forward. I mean, between the LCIP and, you know, all the other pieces that you, are responsible for.
The reason I mentioned it is because most policies are devised by staff and it goes to city council, and that's where it begins and ends. So that's why I brought it up.
No, that's why it makes sense to have the planning board take a peek at it.
And I'm just wondering, for my own edification, graduated care facility, what's the definition?
That was, we talked about that for basically a development that provides housing for all types of, I guess, graduated healthcare.
Cradle to grave.
Yeah, but not even necessarily cradle, but when you're younger and you're healthier, and that the housing complex can accommodate all of your needs all the way
Right.
to death, basically. So it's an ADA accessible building, there's single-story buildings, there's bathrooms, there's doorways that make sense.
Assisted living, nursing home, I mean,
Exactly.
the gamut.
You can get that care. It's almost like the Highlands and Turner, people familiar with that, except that's more of a,
Thompson?
yeah, Tops, I'm sorry. It's like your golf course.
Turner.
So I can move in as an unemployed 20-year-old, and as I acquire diabetes and so forth, and have amputations, and I can move from unit to unit, graduate from one unit to the other.
Right. You're gonna have to pay for it. but-
Cradle to grave.
Yeah. And actually, that's housing, that's actually, I think that's talked about in here, about, I forget the term they use, but that's a popular thing now too, is to
Yeah.
encourage housing that actually can accommodate you, so you don't have this old 2.5-story Victorian that makes absolutely no sense when you're 80 years old. So you have a house that's more accommodating for, you know, all age ability. You know.
Progressive housing.
Yeah, thank you, that's the word I was looking for. We probably need to delete that, but we'll have to come up with another term instead of progressive, but.
Mike loves that word.
Hey, they have it in Augusta and they have it in
He's even trying to get his insurance company to drop.
I know.
Bruce.
I'm ready to move.
Just one more quick thing. It says assist landlords in upgrading their properties. This is like a little more than halfway down the page.
Yep.
And it says work with private landlords to help take advantage of available funds. But I think that this is part of the fundamental issue, is that there's not enough funds available. And we've talked a lot with the city about doing more loan and grant programs, so maybe mentioning those things. Not just helping landlords find the money, but making the money available.
Right, I mean, there's a couple of programs, Efficiency Maine has some programs, there's a PACE program.
Lead
There's
grant.
also, there's the lead grant program, although we found out that the lead grant program is, if the first time somebody has a kid that has a high elevated lead level, the money goes there, and the other landlords get in line behind that, and there's only so much money. Although there was, what, $3 million? It was $3 million for this area.
And I'm well aware of the programs that we've had. I've applied for most of them, gone through the process, trust me. I understand what's out there. The point is that Lewiston, even as compared to Auburn, Lewiston only has, on the city level, has loan programs. Auburn has things like partial grants for curbside appeal grants and things like that for improvements to be made. Even small grants, they have those available in Auburn that they don't have in Lewiston. And, you know, for example, great example right now, my sister's taking advantage of one of the lead grants in Auburn, but that grant wouldn't pick up replacing some of the siding that needed to be replaced. Well, the Auburn grant is helping her pay for the siding and getting the whole thing done, and her portion of the lead loan.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, it would be good if there were more grant programs, or, you know, even if it was a zero-interest loan program, I mean, so that there was some, but that doesn't fall on that purview. Unfortunately, that falls on the purview of the city council to make those funds available and to describe those programs, because we don't have any fiduciary, we can recommend.
I'm not
everything.
suggesting we do.
No, and I agree, you're right, we don't have nearly enough programs here to help upgrade the housing and to help the landlords.
I think Pauline-
Yes, Pauline.
The lead grant money, the 3 whatever million, it's a joint grant with Auburn, so it's not Lewiston has $3 million to deal with lead. One of the other problems that happens is, because I'm on the community development block grant and I was a chairman, is that people need to understand that Auburn is not using, to the best of my knowledge, and I will stand corrected, Lincoln could correct me or Jane, I do not believe Auburn uses any of their community development block grant to pay salaries of employees. We pay out of the community development block grant money as a method to keep the taxes down. We pay Jeff Burrell's salary and Benny's for code enforcement. We pay a GA person, case manager. We pay 1 or 1.5, I can't remember off the top of my head. And some of that money goes to pay salaries of the economic development department. If that money wasn't being paid for those salaries, that would be money that could go into the grant programs. But it's a constant battle with the block grant committee and city council as to whether to pick up salaries or not. So that is something, again, even the community development block grant committee doesn't have any control of that money in that respect. Because the city council is gonna want those positions covered. It's been a battle, since I've been on the block grant committee.
And that block grant continues to shrink, right?
The money, when I started out, it was over $1 million, and I think we're down now to 700,000. And I mean, it's shrinking and shrinking, and now with the new consolidated plan, I think people that got funded, items that got funded before, with the new consolidated plan that was adopted after the budget was done, a lot of programs aren't going to fall in the criteria.
So the point is, there's not, the money isn't there, and I think that it should be made a goal for it to be there for saying we want to improve these certain things. So all I'm suggesting, I'm not saying we come up and write a check right now, I'm just saying that we include a note in there about not just helping people find the funds, but setting up grants, loans, whatever.
So we need to expand the grant programs available to the, are we talking about the downtown, or we're talking citywide?
I would say citywide.
Regarding CDBG funds, are they scheduled to sunset, and are they gonna, within 5 years or 10 years, is there? It seems like they're weaning the cities off of this, is basically what they're doing.
The money's going, I mean, there's more things that the federal government's spending money on, and less money is coming this way. At one point, if you look at the back of the community development block grant, the city of Lewiston was getting about $2 million, and it's just narrowing and narrowing. I mean, when I started, it was 1.2, and we're down to 700,000 and maybe is it 750, right around. It's not a whole lot of money anymore.
The national debt plays a big factor in this. I read something the other day that's very hard to believe, but I want to pass it on at the risk of being scorned right out of this room. By 2020, government's debt is so great that 89% of its revenue is going to be to service the debt, and 11% is to operate the federal government. That's how big the debt is. That's by 2020. And I just can't wrap my mind around that. I just can't. I can't, and I read it in a very reputable, from a very reputable source. Now, even if it were 2025, that's less than 10 years from now. But 89% of the government's revenue is going to be to service the debt, and 11% is going to be to operate the federal government. So when we're talking about shrinking funds, when people express a concern about a debt, Lewiston's debt in the 1990s was down, below 40 million, now it's 160 million. And we're making efforts to try to restrict spending, or at least earmark it for worthy, spend it with responsibility. There's a reason for all this concern, and it's the federal deficit, it's the debt.
Well, if anyone's paid attention to the business news today,
Yeah.
Greece,
Yeah, it was on the news.
labeled Grexit, for the Greek exit from the euro. That's the sort of situation you get into when your debt increases to that point. You can't service it anymore. You have programs that you don't want to get rid of. Interest rates play a big factor. I don't know what their interest rates look like in Greece, but why do you think that Janet Yellen and her predecessor has tried to keep our interest rates as low as possible, even when you think that they probably should increase? And that's because an increase in the interest rate will impact the federal government even more than the rest of us.
Yeah.
And they just can't service that kind of debt. Right? So all these programs keep shrinking. Whether other programs increase, the federal government has shrunk the CDBG across the board. It's not just that we're getting less than some city on the other coast.
Right.
No, everyone's being shrunk at the same pace.
They're backing away from all this.
And there may be a day that it completely goes away for preference of a different program.
Bruce, to Darcy's comment about assisting landlords, so are we looking to add language there that says not just take advantage, but to come up with other sources of funding? Is that what the board's looking up for? What are we looking
I
for?
think that it was to
Create new programs.
create or to,
And/or other sources of funding.
well, I don't know about the funding piece, but.
Create or expand on,
on-
create new or expand on existing loan and grant programs or something.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
How do you propose create or expand? Local funding sources?
That'll be up to the council to decide, I suppose. I mean, the example of the CDBG right there, maybe stop using, I actually heard there was a problem with CDBG funds paying employees. So maybe something like that, okay, then you have the city employees be paid by taxes, and then CDBG dollars go to what really they should be going towards, or have gone towards in the past, I should say.
So shifting the emphasis of the resource, maybe from staff to actually assisting the landlords.
I mean, you're going to see more of a, I think you're going to see a direct impact that way if you're giving or doing loan and grant programs to property owners. They have to invest that money into the properties, then the tax value goes up, they're paying more in taxes, but they're also charging more in rent.
Well, that's what the program has been designed to do since it was $2 million.
What program?
CDBG. When it was $2 million many years ago. Have we really seen the positive results of that? Now you're suggesting that we alter the formula within CDBG, which we have the right to do. They allow us to use the percentages that we use for employees. We don't have to, but we do. If we were to shift that simply by saying, okay, those employees are going to be paid out of the general fund, there'll be more of the funding source from CDBG that'll go towards the loan programs, but then that'll be an impact on all the taxpayers of Lewiston, because you just shifted that cost burden to presumably the operating expenses and the mill rate.
Yeah, it might make a slight change. It might, yeah.
I'm not convinced.
But then you're going to see that return.
I don't think we see much of a return to all this.
Well, of course, we
spending
don't see much of a return if not much money is invested into it right now. I mean, we don't have that $2 million today.
But we did have $2 million once, and we had 1.9 and 1.7 and 1.5, and tell me where that has all gone.
I'm sure there are examples. I mean, track down the paperwork, find out where the money went.
And I would assume that Eric Agron and Jules, they all use CDBG at some amount, right? I know Jules did.
They receive facade grants. I don't know what they have for CDBG funding.
For the housing,
I thought
the
for sure
apartments.
Jules did, but I don't know.
Aaron got the elevated grant too.
Yeah,
know,
yeah, both of them have.
Those are like
No,
safety.
I know, I use CDBG money.
So, see, that's a,
And actually, I can tell, I had a conversation with Misty today, because she was asking when the comp plan was gonna be adopted, because they're actually, I mean, they read the comp plan and they've had this conversation. Her and Link are trying to come up with a policy to make funding available for market rate housing, because they're talking with property owners on Lisbon Street who are looking for funding. We don't have anything to offer them.
That's not new. I mean, that was recommended to the city a long time ago, but yeah.
Well, maybe so, but we don't have it like in a policy.
No, it's great that they're working on it now. I'm just saying it's,
The thing, remember, is that the lead grant, my understanding is lead grant can be used in any building in the city, any building. It can be used at my house, and I live out on the outskirts. Community development block grant money cannot be used anywhere in the city. There are only 4 areas, Census Tract 201, 202, 203, and 204, which is not a big section of the city. It's a very contained part of the city. So if you own property on Outer Sabata Street and you need to have some work done, not gonna get paid by any sort of grant from that program, because you're not gonna be eligible.
but
It's
what's wrong
very
with that?
small.
I guess I'm not seeing, I've read about the loan program that we have in Lewiston, and I've seen that as a downside in the past, that it's only for a very specific area. But I guess I'm trying to see how, in the grand scheme of things, that's bad that it only covers a certain area as opposed to not having the money available at all.
doesn't some of that money also go to nonprofit organizations?
15, out of the total amount of HUD money we get, 15% is used for nonprofit.
And is it for specific programs or just go do what you want with it?
Specific, they have to go through a whole application process and a scoring process, and we literally spend weeks going through
So it's
that.
for a program they're administrating, okay.
Right, and now with the consolidated plan that was adopted by the city council back in May, I think it was, there's gonna be a lot of agencies who will apply for that social services
Right.
that won't,
Because
they're not gonna meet the criteria.
Because there's 4 now focus areas. So we have to fit
within those areas.
Yeah.
So the competition is pretty stiff, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many nonprofit.
Probably goes without saying, but I wanted to hear it.
If you look at your LCIP book, it's as thick and as much information in there.
And I also think it's important to note that, there's a committee that reviews the application.
Absolutely.
Decides where the money's going to, there's a process in place. It's not anyone just sort of handing out money, willy-nilly. And I think that as of right now, that committee is pretty well balanced. I mean, you can speak to that better than I can, probably.
It-
It's been contentious conversations, so it's not.
It's very detailed, there's scoring, it's whether or not they can do the job. When I first started, we had agencies that weren't even doing their quarterly reports. And I had, I was rather blunt in my point, saying, if you don't want to do the reports, why are you here? And those agencies aren't getting funded, and to this day, they're not being funded.
Dave, I know that the hour is late, and I'm not sure that we're going to finish this implementation matrix, so I don't know.
I got all night, I'm all
Whether we,
set.
yeah, you may have. It seems though there's still probably, as much as I hate to say it, it seems as though there's probably one additional meeting here to get
And
through this.
that's fine, as long as we're still chomping at it and to make it go forward here.
I don't know what other folks think. Just-
Can we agree or just, oh, I guess not. I was gonna say, could we finish the strengthening neighborhoods, but I don't know if you guys wanna do that, that's another whole,
We could, that would be pages 6 and 7.
yeah. I mean, that way we could at least complete the section maybe. I don't know if the board would be willing to do that or not.
We can certainly do that, I guess. I don't know if
Sure.
folks have, I would say, and then we'll cut this off, because it is 8:35. So seeing no comments,
Motion to
I
adjourn?
agree.
Yep.
I agree.
no, I mean, I don't want to rush folks on this. This is still part of this. It's all, it's a very
I didn't have any
important piece
comments.
of it, so do we have, does anyone
See
have?
that creative PR campaign for housing section, this comprehensive plan?
No comment, it's fine.
No comment.
And we already know that from the safety perspective, the lead poisoning thing, there's a whole program about that. And I
No
think
comments
everybody's
on lead poisoning.
everybody recognizes that it's a problem. I mean, it's been around for 100 years. We're probably not gonna solve it in the next two. So anybody else have anything?
I didn't necessarily have any notes, but I saw the word parking on line 2.
Parking. Parking?
And it's probably not address parking and open space standards for downtown housing. I know it says for downtown housing. That's not the purpose of my handout, but I'm using it as a segue. Last meeting, I spoke about parking garages.
We have,
And so I've provided the fiscal year 2014 income statement, cash flow statement, and balance sheet. The next page, it individualizes each parking garage, each major lot. Does not include some of the sand lots that we have around town. The next page is a listing of the assets. So if you're looking at a balance sheet perspective on the value of the assets when they were purchased, if there's any depreciation associated or not. Then the next 2 pages is some sort of grid demonstrating what the percentage of use is at certain peak hours. I think we heard from Link a meeting or 2 ago about some of those statistics. I'm not sure that the 92% I heard was referred to as the right statistic, because the usage is not where I was getting at that meeting when you're looking at the Lincoln Street garage.
Using a monthly pass.
Yeah, I think that's what he was doing, and we were led to believe that it was the amount of occupancy. It's not the occupancy, because the occupancy is only around 50 and 60%, as you see in that last column on Lincoln Street garage. But I just thought it'd be interesting if people want to bring that home and study it. Some of it's self-explanatory. I don't even think the financials are all that difficult to understand from a layperson's point of view. Income statement, and if you're running a private business, you'd understand what that means. From a city perspective, it doesn't really want to look at depreciation as an expense. You really want to focus in on cash flow. And then the balance sheet is just there for that purpose. Cash flow, you'll notice for 2014 is $1,116,000 in the negative. That means that's what the people of Lewiston are subsidizing in their mill rate.
You said it's in the negative?
Negative. It'll always be in the negative.
Where does it indicate negative?
right at the bottom, last line.
Second gray shaded from the bottom, far right, your total cash flow, minus, that's in parentheses, 1,116,000. Right there.
Oh, okay.
And then if you flip the page over, you'll see that number at the bottom as well. Each parking garage, you'll see what the cash flow is for each of the 5 years listed. And at the bottom is the above group for each of those 5 years. So, a couple of the years, it kind of went in the right direction, but it continues to trend up. So if you were to take the 5-year average, the numbers would be progressing in an upward fashion. Upward meaning more,
Positive.
more loss.
More loss.
More loss.
Why don't we see the negatives here? I mean, you're seeing all kinds of.
Parentheses is a negative.
Parentheses.
Oh, I didn't know that. Why would I know that parentheses are in the negative?
Accounting class.
I didn't take accounting class. Yeah, but, I'm the only one that's speaking up here, but half of these people don't know what it is.
I'm sure they do.
No, they don't. Maybe they do. Fine, I'll give them credit, but I don't.
For that year, yeah.
If you look at Canal Street, it'd be nice if
Canal Street's in the black,
yeah, Canal Street's in the black.
that's by
That, but that,
the chamber. No, it was the John Street one.
So all the parentheses.
Sancherville.
Centerville, oh, okay.
You knew that, right?
That's the-
Yeah.
that one, okay.
The reason it's in the black is partially because it's fully paid for, there's no debt service. If there is debt service, it's small, it's just major fixes that might go into it. I think they had to repave the upper deck.
Of the excessive snow.
Yeah. Except snow. But
So are we all done with that section?
I think so.
You want to make a motion before you leave?
I'd like to make a motion that we end the meeting.
Well, actually, I was going to ask if there was any other business before the board from members. Michael?
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider a vote that was taken at last week's meeting on dormitories. If you remember, I was the one that made the motion, so I'm on the prevailing side.
So Robert's rules
Yep.
allows him to bring it up again.
And the members who were in attendance that would normally be voting on that were Norm, Kevin, myself, Michael, Paul, were there for that discussion. So I'm not sure how we deal with the members that were not here to hear the discussion.
Yeah, well, I would say they'd be abstaining from it, I guess,
Yeah.
but, just for discussion purposes, that is scheduled for the first reading tomorrow night before the city council. So there would be 2 readings, but they are looking to act upon the first reading tomorrow night.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? What, the motion, the motion to it's a motion to reconsider the action taken as it references the dormitories within the highway business district. So there's a motion before the floor. Is there a second?
I don't understand what's going on.
Can I be clear? I'm not voting, right?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
What's the procedure of Walter not being?
Right.
This has happened in the past, if you remember, in 2009 on Lincoln Street Garage. We actually had one member not be here, different members showed up, lots of discussion, it was raised, different outcome, simply because a different person was here. So it's permissible. And
I know it was, I was just.
And I was thinking earlier that maybe we should wait till the next regular meeting, but I wasn't even thinking that this issue's coming to the council tomorrow. So timing is of the essence. Not that the outcome will change, but to put it back on the floor, maybe we end up voting the same thing back in, or maybe there's an alteration or a complete reversal. I could go 3 different
What the
ways.
discussion was about was to permit dormitories that were not associated with educational use at that location within the highway business district, and it was specifically added sports organizations as a sponsoring party to a dormitory within the HB district, and HB is fairly broad district.
So, is it safe to presume that you're looking for different wording on this as opposed to an up or down vote for or against it?
It's a motion to reconsider the action. Yes.
Just reconsider the action. It's not directed towards language or,
Like, he wants to mention something about the language, but you have to.
First thing you gotta do,
yeah, we gotta get there.
gotta get there.
I'll second it.
So there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of the reconsideration?
Is that 3?
Yeah, no, it's all 5, it's the 5 guys, the ones that were here.
Okay, no, sorry, I was looking for hands and I'm not seeing them. so.
Technically, everybody should be,
Well, we can, I mean, I'm certainly, well,
because if you remember right, when we
Unfortunately,
did
they
it, somebody asked me if, maybe, I don't know if it's a reconsideration vote or the actual new language that was voted on. But the member that wasn't there at the previous meeting was allowed to vote. Somebody asked me whether, he should be allowed to. I had an opportunity to complain. I didn't use it. I don't know it would have made any difference, but he ended up voting, and it made a difference.
Yeah, well, I think that the reconsideration motion would have to be voted by the members that were in attendance,
Probably.
and then the rest of the discussion could include everybody. Is that?
I tend to think so. I can run upstairs and grab the policy to see if it gives any direction.
We'll just make it, let's see where it goes.
Now, what about the individuals who made this request? Wouldn't it be fitting for them to be here?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's-
Gil and I were just saying that, I mean, whether or not it needs to be on the agenda, I don't know that it does need to be on the agenda, but,
I thought it
Hear this correctly if they're not here.
because the policy does talk about how it can be reconsidered at the next meeting. I mean, the policy is clear about that.
Then, and there's a motion and a second and a vote to reconsider. So maybe the issue is that we need to allow them to come back, and the thing needs to be postponed off the city council agenda because of the timing.
Yeah,
Do we
I would suggest if the motion's gonna carry here, then you would probably continue to the discussion then, and then a motion to continue it, because no one is here on behalf of that proposal to
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, that sounds.
to answer any of your questions or
yeah,
concerns,
that's right. I don't,
whatever they may be. Because that was a public hearing that was advertised, and I would think, you know, in order to be transparent and give everybody an opportunity to weigh into it,
Open
you would at
Maybe
least
we should outline what the change in the language is being proposed is.
well, that's what I was getting at.
We had to get to this point first.
I understand that, but I
Procedurally.
couldn't wait.
Have we had the motion to reconsider yet?
I think we have had the motion to reconsider.
And
So
if-
what is it that you wanna do?
And
That's what we want. Bruce and Gil,
Yeah,
Bruce.
I think what it is that we want to do is not going to affect the applicant in any way. That's why it probably wouldn't hurt to have it tonight as opposed to waiting. Last meeting, I wasn't sure where things were going. I was amenable to a different outcome, but as things progressed, had to take one step at a time, and I went with the motion that I made, and it prevailed 5-1. Maybe a little bit to my surprise, or actually, to that level, that it surprised me. It was suggested that we reopen it for the purposes of changing permitted to conditional. That would not change this applicant's outcome in any way. And I don't think there's another person in the room from another highway business district that really gave any to-do about this, is it zoning? Is that what we call it?
In that zone.
Zoning change?
I think the discussion really circulates around it. What happened is the motion was to make these dormitories associated with sports as organizations as a permitted use. So as a right, anybody that wanted to do it could just walk into Dave's office and he'd say, it's a permitted use, end of story. And I think that the concern that I had, and that I think that is where I'm trying to go with this a little bit, is that there should be a public hearing about that type of thing. If that changed from a hockey team to a soccer team, and there was there's no way of putting conditions on how it's managed, there's no way of putting conditions on where they are now, because it's a permitted use. Nobody will ever see them again. I mean, it'll never come up for a public hearing. They're just gonna walk into Dave's office and get a permit, and by right. And I'm not convinced that that's appropriate under that type of use. Now, if it's at a educational facility, and it's, directly associated and sponsored by an educational facility, like USM, LA College, or Kaplan, it already is in there. It's a right that they have now. They can just get it. But when you start to broaden it to less organized or less effective organizations, it seems to me that somebody should be looking at it from a public hearing and a public perspective. Or else I think so I think the wording should have said that it was approved as a conditional use, and every time they had to come back before the planning board to get permission for the specific location and the specific organization.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Paul?
But that wasn't your objection. You didn't want it there at all. It wasn't a question of language. Now,
No, that-
let me finish, please. Okay? And you were unequivocal about it. So, as you present it, with all due respect now, okay, because I appreciate your leadership here, is that wasn't the premise as to why you voted it down. So, I just want to add that as a footnote.
However, I did say during the time that I said I could probably agree to it as a conditional use. I did say that at the time, and but one of the problems of being as chair, you cannot make the motion. So the motions get made by others, and that's one of those things that happens. Now, we may decide that allowing it as a permitted use is absolutely appropriate tonight, and if that's the case, then so be it. I just think that it's unfortunate that when we do something like that, we paint a broad brush and that nobody ever gets to look at what the next application is, but specifically on something that I think that's potentially creates a dynamic in the HB district that, you had the concerns, Paul, of, about noise and how it affected other tenants and things like that. Well, if nobody asks those questions, how do we protect those other businesses? That's all I'm saying, is that if it's gonna be like that, that's a different use than what highway business is typically used for, and that we should at least be able to ask those questions and put some constraints on it, or some conditions. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Michael?
And I do remember hearing the chair comment about conditional. When I read the motion, I almost used the word like I once did before, but then got reprimanded at the next meeting because nobody heard me say conditional. I wanted this thing to pass, and I figured I'd have two shots at it, two bites at the apple. So if permitted failed, which I thought there's a potential for that, then I'd go with conditional. But I didn't, and permitted passed. So
I do remember Bruce's
Yeah.
wordage to that effect.
And so I'm very amenable to changing the vocabulary to conditional, and that's why I was willing to make the reconsideration motion tonight.
Do we need all 5 votes, or do we only need 4?
Motion is now on the table as permitted. Somebody would have to make the motion to amend the word, so that would have to be the first vote. And then the new one, as amended, would then be voted on.
But have we decided if we can even do all this?
I would suggest, I think this is gonna screw things up for them. Be that as it may, I think you really should continue it. You've made a motion to reconsider, great. I would suggest just your next motion should be continue the discussion to the next meeting. Because the applicant should be here for this discussion. I mean,
It doesn't affect the applicant.
that's not, it may not, Mike, I don't necessarily disagree, but it is a different recommendation that they were here for, and we don't know whether or not they may have a compelling reason as to why a conditional use isn't an appropriate use category.
I have a basic question, maybe this will help, maybe it's not. Do we have a majority that would like to make it a conditional use versus a permitted use?
Well, I'll make the motion to amend the language to conditional use.
Because that sort of, just with a straw vote, if you don't have a majority, then,
I feel
I
uncomfortable
understand
not having the
I
applicant
understand.
here, but I would I wouldn't disagree with it categorically, but I don't feel comfortable handling this matter when the applicant's not here. For him to appear at city council,
and I'm not even suggesting that, I'm just, if you're not.
this is straw.
Right, if you're not gonna have enough people that think it's a conditional use, there's no sense putting it off to a future meeting. That's my point. And you can withdraw a motion.
Well,
If you think you've got enough support for conditional
Well, there's no
use.
reason to move forward and find out if the votes are there.
What's that?
No reason why we can't move forward. If the votes aren't there,
I'm not suggesting that you don't, I'm just saying you could do it with a straw vote, it's not complicated. Do we wanna go from a permitted use to a conditional use? Is there support for that? If there is, then I would suggest, like Paul said, that you take it up at the next meeting.
I would support the use
You
of,
continue it you raise it like you did, but you schedule.
Takes it
for
off the
next
council agenda tomorrow, if we continue it.
meeting. Well,
I don't know.
Well, you can't answer that question. I'm moving forward with the idea that I want to amend the language to conditional use.
I mean, I can't say what the council's gonna do.
I'll second that for discussion.
For discussion. Straw, right?
Straw poll.
Well, it's for discussion right now.
Now it's for discussion, it's a motion on the floor. and a second.
And now we can discuss it.
We can discuss it, and it'll come to a vote, and if it prevails, then we move
Now,
on to the
so,
whole.
and the other problem with this, Mike, this is problematic, council, this is problematic. There are individuals now who are being asked to vote on a matter they weren't even present at when the thing was presented. Is that protocol?
I'm gonna abstain.
Yeah, with,
Is that protocol?
with respect to that, Paul, I would agree that those members should abstain, because we don't even have the minutes done yet for someone to get up to speed. The example Mike used where we didn't have somebody at that meeting, they actually got the minutes, they watched the tape, and the board made there was a conscious decision whether or not that person should participate in the meeting.
Watch the tape. I think that was a railroad job. We're talking about the Lincoln Street Garage, right?
Right,
Yeah,
that was Roger Phillip on it.
yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
I just want to follow protocol here. I don't, you know.
It may be appropriate for certain members, if they choose themselves not to vote on this because they didn't hear the whole discussion, to be able to make a decision whether they even want to support, the permitted use or not, because
Agreed.
that would be a concern.
Agreed.
But, for everybody else who was here to hear the entire discussion, the difference between permitted and conditional is meaningless to the applicant. The meaning is for the rest of the city, and that this board will not have the purview to look at another project going in somewhere else. Maybe what we're agreeing to on Westminster doesn't make any sense to us if it's on Bartlett Street, or if it's on another highway business area that I can't think of right now, but I thought there was another one in the downtown area.
You mentioned the Bartlett Street.
Yeah, Bartlett Street is categorically a highway business. I think Pine Street was community business.
What about, how many feet of Bartlett Street is a highway business? A couple hundred feet?
More than a couple hundred.
I mean, all right, okay. Maybe it's esoteric to even mention it, but.
So to be clear, Mike made a motion. Was there a second to that motion, or was it?
Yes, there was. Norm made a
I didn't
motion.
mention who wasn't even.
No, I
present.
realized there was a motion for the reconsideration. I'm asking about, Mike made a second, another motion. And Norm seconded, but I thought Norm seconded a straw poll. I don't know what, I'm not sure what you seconded, I
That's
guess.
what I was getting clarification for. I was asking.
So-
We should vote on the motion.
He did, it was 5-0.
What's that?
It was 5-0.
Five-zero.
Okay.
I still need a motion to end the meeting.
So, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? The motion is to change the wording from permitted in highway business to conditional.
No, that's not what I voted on. My vote was to discuss the straw vote.
No, that wasn't Vince's motion.
I seconded the motion to do the straw
No,
vote.
there was no motion for a straw vote.
Well, I didn't second that.
So all I have at this point is a motion from Mike to change it from conditional to permitted.
Second the motion.
Kevin will second the motion to change the verbiage to conditional.
Now we can discuss.
Now we can discuss.
Yeah, well, it's,
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I call for a vote. All in favor of changing the wording from permitted to conditional?
I have a question. David, can you tell me with all assurance that this is not going to affect the applicant's status on this particular?
I don't know what the council's gonna do tomorrow night. If the council decides that this needs to go back to the planning board, it will delay their project. Part of the reason they were scheduled tomorrow night was they made a request to administration and the mayor to be scheduled at a special meeting, because otherwise the council's only meeting twice, a meeting in July, the meeting in August. And I said, it's out of my hands, if you can talk to Ed and the mayor, you can move things along. That being said, if this was approved as a conditional use, they will now need to go to the Board of Appeals to get approval. They can't go to the Board of Appeals until at least the second reading of the city council. Technically, the ordinance
Well,
doesn't.
30 days.
Technically, the ordinance doesn't become effective for 30 days, so the board shouldn't even really be hearing it until 30 days after the effective date.
Legally, they can't.
Because it's not a,
No, no,
it's not an ordinance. So
So
even,
is that why it was worded that way? To circumvent the system?
no, they felt that it should be a permitted use.
I don't think it's them that wanted a permitted use, it's staff that wanted a permitted use. It doesn't matter to them whether it's conditional or permitted.
I don't know that it doesn't. I don't know that it doesn't.
But he's explaining the process, that it will delay the,
Right.
and that's something I wouldn't be willing to do. I'm just,
We work with them on the language. I could care less if they go to the Board of Appeals or the planning board, or it's a permitted use or a conditional use. Their whole concern is timing. And that's really not my problem. They've been talking to me since January, and they only decided to show up at the 11th hour. So, I mean, they've made their own.
It's interesting that that discussion did not enter into last week's hearing.
there wasn't the basis for it.
That whole dynamic was never presented to us.
It's not really germane to the
It's not
process.
germane, it wasn't the basis.
It's not germane. I mean, there was someone who wanted conditional, verbalized it. Another person, myself, who did not verbalize it, would have probably preferred conditional. It's the only reason that I'm offering this up tonight. Otherwise, I would have not gone forward with this. But I think we're being toyed with here. I mean,
I don't see, I don't
we
see
get
that.
we get the information that drives us in one direction. And it's very rare that, we ever go in a different direction, and it's always very confrontational, if we do go in another direction. But last week wasn't confrontational. And the reason is, that, because we weren't given all the options. And there was no discussion that, conditional would have to go to the appeals board first, if that was our judgment.
We didn't discuss it, Mike, though.
It wasn't discussed, yeah, I would have to agree with David on that. This was not, it wasn't germane because it wasn't the basis for our motion and our movement. There was no, we weren't asked to look at all the options. I mean, there's even more than what we've been discussing. Let me finish. There may be even more discussions, more options than we're even discussing now. So, but, should we discuss them? They would develop as they go. Right now, the options now are because we want to change it, not because of the way it was presented.
I mean, anytime you have anything before you, I mean, you look at it and you think about it and you act as you see it.
As you see it.
But you're not gonna get a proponent that's gonna come to you and say, well, these are your options. The proponent wants to do this, period. And if you don't think it makes sense, you can make it a conditional use, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other thing.
Okay, so again, David, based on what you've just said, if we change the language, they can't go to council tomorrow.
Yes, it could,
They could,
yeah.
based on our new language?
Yes, we would just represent to the council that planning board reconsidered it, they think it makes more sense.
So
as
now they go to
conditional use.
appeals now because it's conditional.
Correct.
Right.
And we would let the council know, David actually is gonna be there, that the board had concern that in some HB districts, it might not make sense. So if you had a conditional use mechanism, at least it's a way to raise the flag up.
Right, okay.
And I think from what I heard from Mike said, he doesn't really have any heartburn with the Westminster location, but maybe like a highway business on Bartlett Street, maybe
Right.
that's not appropriate.
Right, okay, so,
There's merit to it.
all right, so they go to council tomorrow, and then it's conditional, then they go to appeals. Appeals doesn't hear it until when?
They would go to the council, they need to go to the council twice, so they would go to the council tomorrow, they would go to the council on July 14th.
Twice.
Correct.
Right.
After July 14th,
Go to
if it's a
appeals.
favorable recommendation, it's 30 days until it becomes effective.
Which means
But appeals,
August
right?
19th,
So they couldn't go to the Board of Appeals any sooner than
August
August.
19th.
And then what?
They make their request for a conditional use permit before the Board of Appeals. They presumably get approval, great.
And they come back to council?
Nope, then they're done.
They're done. Okay. So they do it in time for season, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Now-
other than the delays, I mean, yeah, it is
Now,
what it is.
we're talking about preparing a facility, right? They have to prepare that facility.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to Mike
How
earlier
extensive is
today, my understanding is that it's mostly partition walls in there. The biggest thing that they're gonna have to do is put in bathrooms and a kitchen,
Wiring.
you know? So, I mean, we can, my only concern is that the applicant isn't here. I would, otherwise I totally agree with Gil that we'll present them with your action tonight if it moves forward. And to Mike's point, I don't know that it really makes a big difference for them, other than there's an additional review process involved for them.
All right, fine.
It just-
And cost, correct?
Question.
And cost, $150.
And there's always the uncertainty.
What? Cost?
The uncertainty
Yes,
that
Nora.
it can get passed.
Could we make this change after the fact? Not, obviously, they would not be involved in it, but for the future?
You could revisit it.
Interesting.
Can we petition another hearing for this? To
Just
make it
for
a
our-
conditional use in that district?
You folks
You
can
could initiate
initiate.
an amendment on your own at
Right.
any point in time and say, yeah, we've thought about it, we don't think it makes sense.
Right.
Let's bring
So
it
at that
back.
point,
At that point, we make it conditional,
they become a condition,
and they're
they're non-conforming.
Right.
they're non-conforming permitted use.
No, they would be deemed to be a,
Grandfather.
I forget what the language in the code says, but if you're a permitted use, it becomes conditional, you're deemed to have a conditional use permit.
Right.
Until they leave.
So you're not non-conforming.
Right, if they left for some reason then, and someone, wanted to come in there, then they would need a conditional use.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, if you left and the property was vacant for more than 12 consecutive months,
Then
you lose the use, you gotta go back through the process.
That seems like a response, that seems like a possibility. You want to initiate something like
Seems
that?
fair to them.
But maybe they bought the I don't mean to make it worse, but maybe they bought the property planning on selling it later.
They don't own the property.
No, they.
Roderick was here, he owned the property.
He's owned it for years.
I mean, and he's doing this understanding, I think he said, what, 5-year commitment or something?
They got a 5-year.
I mean, if you really want it, if you were really concerned about bad behavior down the road, I almost think you might even wanna consider licensing. I mean, that's an annual review. I mean, I don't know what kind of conditions you're gonna put on something, and it turns into an animal house, it turns into an animal house. And I don't know how many we're gonna see. I mean, this is the first request of this nature that I think I've seen in over 30 years.
To me, that makes more sense.
To revisit it after the fact, to give them a buy.
It's up to you folks, I will present whatever action you folks take to the council tomorrow night. I just, personally, I think it leaves a sour taste in my mouth that they're not here, even though it may not change it, I
And
guess,
it's not
but.
fair to you.
I,
Right.
Internet.
But that said, I mean, I will, if the board wants to go in the conditional use direction, we'll present that tomorrow night.
Well,
We should revisit it, it should be on a future agenda.
Sandy and I.
Well, at this point, we have made a motion to reconsider. We have made a motion to amend the language. If the language was amended, then the overall motion would have to be voted on again. If it was not amended, technically you should vote on the motion again, although I think we know what the outcome would be. And that would be the end of it. Or we could probably pull both motions, working backwards, like nothing happened, right? You were saying earlier that we can withdraw motions? I'm looking at Gil.
Right?
Yeah.
As long as the people who did the motions.
Right. Second.
Or we just follow through with this, and one or two things will happen. Either the conditional will prevail or it won't.
And if it doesn't, as far as some people are concerned, no harm, no foul.
If there's only
You
gonna
wanna
be
make a
five,
motion? I think
Well,
it's
it's
up
been
to you.
seconded.
Yeah,
It's
you
been
need to make
seconded.
a decision.
and for what it's worth,
I think the only question now is, so do the people who weren't here, have we figured that out? Are they voting? I'm not even sure they know if they're voting or not.
and whoever is voting, you need to have at least 4 affirmative votes for it to be a positive recommendation. So if there's only 5 of you voting, that just should be,
It's more.
It's 5, yeah. So I guess, and, you know, I mean, and I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but you weren't here for the discussion and all of that.
No, my position, I wasn't here. I will go on record as I did review the tape, but I still wasn't here for the whole discussion, and I'm gonna abstain.
So, all right, so we'll start off with 3 abstentions.
That's all good.
That's, all those who abstain. No, no, it's
Okay,
just-
I wanna make perfectly clear what I'm voting on here.
What we're voting on, right now, what we're voting on is a change in the language that dormitories, as defined, associated with either educational facilities or sports organizations, would be a conditional use in the highway business district. That's the motion, right?
That would be a recommendation to the council.
That's the recommendation of council.
Just to alleviate any confusion, when Bruce said 3 abstentions, no, is he replacing Darcy's appointment earlier in the meeting with Paul? So technically, so that would technically be 2 abstentions and an associate not
How
voting.
about,
So-
I'm not voting, they're abstaining. How about
Oh,
we do it that way?
that's
Maybe
what-
that'll be cleaner cut, yeah.
All right, okay.
So
yeah,
there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
There'd be 5 people voting.
There'd be 5 people voting.
Now, are we rescinding anything here, or are you moving ahead? What's the deal?
The motion says that the dormitories would become a conditional use in the highway
Retroactive
district.
to the applicant? Effective-
It would be, across, the recommendation to the city council would be that it's a conditional use, not a permitted use.
Motion on the floor right now.
That's the motion on the floor right now.
And even if it does not prevail, my intention is to revisit it, as we were just discussing, to make highway business conditional on that use in the future. One way or the other.
Okay, one way or the other.
So, you understand where we're at now, Norm?
Yeah.
No, I'm not, I want to make sure that everybody understands exactly what the motion is and what we're voting on. The voting members, as it stands right now, are Paul, Mike, myself, Kevin, Sandy, Pauline, and Norm.
No, they're
Yes,
abstaining.
But they're voting now.
voting members,
They're gonna
they're the voting
choose.
members.
Oh.
All in favor of the motion as presented, raise your hand. That's 2. All opposed? That's 3. Abstains? That's 2. So it's 2 to 3 to 2. The motion does not carry.
So the original language is back to permitted.
The original motion would be so the reconsideration failed.
It's still, we should have a vote on the, because you reopened it, you gotta close it, so you still have to have a vote on the final.
Presumably that'll pass either,
5 to 0, 4 to 1.
So then the original motion needs to be revisited? So the original motion that Michael made last week at the meeting was that that dormitories associated with educational facilities or sports organizations would become permitted uses in the highway business district.
But that's no longer there anymore. I mean, you basically voted to reconsider, that passed, and then you voted to make a recommendation to the council as a conditional use that
And
did
that
not
failed.
pass. It was a 3-2 vote.
but now you have to close the motion that's open.
Which motion?
Which motion's open?
Because we reconsidered it. When you reconsider it, you reopen the motion. It's not closed yet.
Well, you reconsidered.
No, we
You
go to.
closed the motion by reconsidering it.
Right.
And you close it then?
It's,
You
How late
amended
is
it.
Denny's open so I can go have breakfast
Yeah,
and get out of here?
So the amendment failed.
We could continue to make amendments until the cows come home.
But you undid your motion from the previous meeting, right? That no longer
So
stands.
we undid, and we need to close it.
What do you suggest, Michael?
Then we call the roll.
On what though?
This can be done in 2 seconds. Call
On
the roll.
last week's motion, what he's saying is that he opened it up for reconsideration. The vote was to reconsider it. They had another motion for it to become a conditional use that failed.
Yeah.
So therefore, you need to go back and vote on last week's motion. Is that correct, Michael?
Correct.
anybody else understand what's going on?
I follow that. I mean, that's fine. If everybody agrees to go in that
No,
fashion,
that makes sense.
then that, I get you.
So you're
On-
voting,
So if you want-
you're
you want a-
voting on last week's
You want a
motion.
positive motion, is what
Yes,
you want.
we're gonna recall,
That didn't
we're
count.
gonna recall last week's motion. So
And
that,
if it fails, then they can't go anywhere.
that's right.
That's right.
Oh, my Lord.
Which, I mean, it goes to my point about process and everything.
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right, so the motion before us at the moment is that the dormitories.
That was tricky.
that the-
That was really underhanded and tricky.
Just walk.
That's like a Mark Kayer move. Go ahead, vote. Start calling you Mark Kayer.
That's a,
Go sign up for Mean People's
that's
Alliance.
a Darcy.
No.
Darcy's the one that's done it once, at least once, if not twice.
What?
So the motion is to recall the action of last week that dormitories would be a permitted use in the highway district.
You backed everybody into a corner, basically, but that's,
All right, let's move on.
Okay, call roll, all in favor? Opposed? Abstained? You got your 4 votes?
Did you vote, Mike?
Yes.
You were too.
Pay attention.
It's
quick.
4, it's 4 to 1 to 2.
so it's not a
I
permitted use.
had no
If
intention,
four affirmative votes, it carries. It passes.
It is permitted.
just to answer Darcy's charge, I had no intention of making a mockery of this.
So isn't it, so what is the result now? I'm totally
Result
lost.
is exactly where we started.
Well, we've started.
It's now
It's
permitted.
permitted.
It's, the recommendation
You two-
is it's a permitted use.
Okay, all right.
Paul, Mike, Kevin, and Norm voted for it. Mr. Damon voted against it. Sandy Marquis and I voted, we abstained from voting. Just trying to, as secretary, we're gonna get this, and everyone's gonna be confused who voted where, what, and how, so.
Well, yes, it has to be counted.
I do think you
we
should
did your
bring it
job.
back up. To
That
change
will
it
be,
future time.
so, David,
Yeah, and I think
at
that's.
the next meeting, I would like that to be an agenda item.
What's that?
The-
I'm not being wise, Bruce. I'm trying to get the minutes right here.
At the next
doing it online.
regularly scheduled meeting
Yes,
of the planning board,
yes.
there would be an item
Yep.
for the reconsideration, or the consideration of changing it to conditional. As an action originated by the board.
Are you, to be clear, just, I want to make sure, it's one thing to have it as a discussion. Are you folks asking me to schedule a proposed amendment to the zoning and land use code?
That's correct, I think.
No, can,
Because there's a difference. If you guys want to talk about it, great, it's under other business, and you guys make a motion to direct staff to come up with an amendment. If you're asking me tonight to come up with an amendment, then make a motion to come up and to direct staff to schedule a public hearing. Because it makes a difference. I gotta do a notice like in a couple of days versus just having a discussion.
Well, let's do it as discussion for the next meeting, so that we get everybody involved, because there were 3 members that weren't involved. Let's do it as a discussion first, and then we'll come up with
Bruce, I'm just worried, if it were, and this is why I tried to interrupt, if we were to change it on the 13th, wouldn't that have an effect, because that change of the zoning would not have had its second reading in front of the council by the 13th? or
Well, on
by
the 13th, you're gonna discuss it. And
Right,
you-
but
and you
that's
may
why I'm making
schedule it
sure.
For a public hearing, for some future meeting.
Some future meeting, but I don't wanna drop it.
I understand that, but I just got nervous if we're gonna have a meeting, if that had not gone into effect. They've gotta have, 2 hearings,
You could
correct?
have 2 meetings
Two
before they
readings,
have
excuse me.
their 2.
That's right.
Right, you don't wanna,
We don't wanna keep.
Why not?
I understand your concern. I don't think that's gonna be an issue because you folks are gonna discuss it at the next meeting. You'll make a motion whether or not to actually amend the ordinance. Then at the next meeting on the
Then you have to go to the
Thank
paper.
you.
29th or whatever, 27th would be the actual hearing then. And then we would go to the city council, August 14th.
And we can still stop it because it wouldn't become effective till August 9th.
Well, no, it'll be right behind it. I mean, 15 days after it's effective, there would be a new effective ordinance potentially.
I have a question. This goes to the council tomorrow. Who's to say the council doesn't like the idea of permitted and wants to change it to conditional?
Then I would suggest that they send it back to you folks.
Right. But once they get the recommendation, are they just simply permitted to change it as they see fit? With a majority vote or a
Can't be a
supermajority?
substantive change, substantive.
Substantive.
Substantive, yeah, thank you. Wait,
It's late. The words aren't
But
coming
you-
out right.
I was in here 6:30.
I mean, to you,
How many does that to have a?
Is that the one item that they do have to get the supermajority?
yes.
That we've had discussions in the past about, that would be the one item.
Yeah, so if they change it, so the recommendation is it's a permitted use right now. They wanted to deviate from it, then they would either need a
Need 5
supermajority,
votes.
or I would suggest that they should really send it back to the planning board for your consideration as a conditional use. I don't know that it's a substantive change, but it is a change, and you folks should discuss it and vent it. And again, I don't know that the applicant is gonna have an issue, but the circumstances would be that the applicant could have an issue, right? So you want that opportunity to come back and discuss it.
I'm sure after this discussion, you will recommend that they bring it back to planning,
Yeah,
or you're gonna be hung.
yeah, really. They're cool with it, they're just go with it.
No, no.
Month end, are we even gonna miss the DNAC's final meeting?
So before, I know we all wanna go home, there is a meeting on the 13th. It's not a comp plan meeting. That is our next meeting. The 13th will have a wonderful Franklin Properties Amendment that the council initiated and had first reading on. So you folks will have a proposed amendment. You may have a daycare amendment for you for parking as well. I'm gonna figure that out here in the next couple of days. I'm not sure if I have something else for you, but we're gonna have
That's
a
gonna be
regular.
conditional, right?
That was progressive.
Yeah. We're coming up with a progressive.
meaning more parking.
So my point being is that our next comp plan meeting won't be almost for a month. We're not gonna talk about the comp plan until probably the 20th.
I can be
So we
here
have a
next
day off
Monday.
next week?
You have a day off,
Nice.
so
We have a day off?
you have next Monday off,
Monday off.
so enjoy.
You enjoyed.
By then, when you come back,
Motion
I
to
will.
adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Kevin,
Thank you,
second.
Kevin.
All in favor?
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Pick up something. It's unanimous.
I was in the chairs a long time ago.
Good night.
Give us information and
That's all right. I have next week off.
Again?
Again? Again.
you tease me when you say.
February or April?
I save up all my time so I can do it all in big chunks versus doing long weekends here and there. Yeah. So,
Have a good vacation.
Thank you.
What if I had voted against that? I really would. I'll have to remember that technique, though. Come in handy later.
Oh, yeah, would have made things interesting.
Yeah, so that's why
Yeah, so, that's fine. I mean, they know they're pressed for time. It's not, you know, shame on them though. I mean, they come in at the 11th hour too. I
What'd you
mean,
say, Mark? I didn't hear you, Mark. Mr. Kayer, did you say something? You're never gonna live that down now. You have no idea.
Well, Mr. Hediger, we got the back doors, what's the door to the upstairs? And then I'll get the front doors.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
See you in the morning.
Good night.
I had no idea that.
You didn't really give a shit either way, did you?
No good deed goes unpunished,
I
Mike.
had no idea that in the end, if I voted the other way, it would have, actually potentially being. But when you brought it up, at that moment, it crossed my mind.
I will add this to the list of reasons I hate politics.
You guys are killing me. That's all right.
Yeah.
Keeps it interesting.
That's why Mr. Roberts came up with those rules.
Oh my God, yeah. Back in the 18th century, in a parliamentary procedure.
Thank goodness we have those though. I'll see you later, Mark. Have a good night.
Mark.
Yeah. Have a good night, Mr. Kayer.
Fellas,